Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the Big Boys Table, episode 27, Communities. We've got a community of our own over here with Mesk and Dynamo. What's up, guys?
Hello.
Smoke weed every day.
We're here to talk about modding communities. And speaking of weed, let's start with Blizzard. So, Blizzard has is definitely the one where Mesk and I are the most experienced. But Mesk has a lot of experience with others. Dynamo has a lot of experience with others. So we're going to be talking about all sorts of different communities today. I just want to talk first about motor shows and how they're bad and interrupt podcasts. By the way, there's going to be a lot of background noise in this one. I tried to wait it out, but it's just some children just should have been aborted. And you just got to wonder how Blizzard's modding communities managed to avoid that abortion in the first place. I don't understand how most of them got off the ground, especially with the caliber of releases that we saw in the early stages, talking specifically of Brood War. But it actually got worse over time, as we're seeing evidence of. And, like, barring a few outliers, like Legacy of the Confederation is definitely the worst one out of every one that I've ever played. Probably the worst across all games. And this is including that Malfurion's Quest thing that Mesk saw. So I feel like that should hold some statement.
Flame knives.
Significantly. I would much rather play Flame Knives again, like three times, than play Legacy of the Confederation one more time. So I'll put it to you that way. But yeah, it's not looking good, guys. But so I just wanted to.
The guy.
Oh, go ahead.
Who is like criticizing people for spending money on stuff and goes around and spends money on stuff without doing any research at all.
Yeah, of course.
Have we talked about that? Like
no, we can segue into that. The Legacy of the Confederation is one of the biggest money sinks in the custom community section or whatever, like the saga, the lore of custom content. I feel like it probably is across all genres and all communities. And maybe Dynamo or Mesk have some experience with other projects that were funded in that sense, but Legacy of the Confederation actually has thousands of dollars put into it, maybe even tens of thousands at this point.
The only thing I'm aware of is people paying for music, like people paying for having custom tracks made, and that's the only thing I ever saw before Legacy of the Confederation. So I don't really have that much experience in that field.
I don't know about the first one. I really don't know anything about it. I'll consider myself lucky for never having been subjected to it. But okay, so in terms of community, so obviously with Brood War, most of that's like Campaign Creations, and then Star Alliance, and then Anchilla Editing Network, and then Lavasoft, and then there's a couple others I just don't remember. Like, I remember them, I don't remember the name, I remember the people, but yeah, Legacy of the Confederation. So you probably noticed, like, way back then, like Brood War had a lot of people doing like voice acting and custom graphics and stuff like that, but really like at the forefront of it was Joel Studler, I think that's how you pronounce his name.
Yeah.
And he did, CGI and the portraits and other stuff like that, and he was really like the bullet head of everything that went on there. Like, everything that comes out of these campaigns ultimately went through him. And then you had some people who pretended to do stuff like Zeus Legion and Auspex, who just were depressing because they never produced anything really noteworthy. But Joel Stuhler was actually a professional artist, and he would actually return during Warcraft 3 and the whole .com incident. So I'm sure you're gonna like bounce back and go into community, so maybe we're like going sort of off time here. But with Legacy of the Confederation, the whole attempts to sort of recapture that, campaign with assets that sets the stage and stuff like that was actually attempted in Warcraft 3. I don't think many people are actually aware of that. I'm sure I mentioned it before, but back when CC lost its .com address because of I forget the exact specifics, but somebody uploaded a campaign, someone didn't want up there, and Destler yanked the .com because he still had possession of it after all these years, despite the fact he never had anything to do with the site after all these years. And then they started up their own website, him and Joel, to try to one-up CC. Like, it was all just sort of like really on the spot. And they had this really, really shitty Warcraft 3 demo map that was like a demo for a campaign with a giant telegraphic boss that was entirely untextured. So
Great. Excellent starting.
Face of the earth. What?
It's an excellent starting point for a campaign, you know?
Yeah. So, I mean, it was something that had, I guess, promise if they really put in the time to polish it. But without really knowing Dessler at all, I can't really, know why he didn't really commit to it or whatever. But that faded back into obscurity. CC.org took off and then was promptly abandoned. And Oracle would then show up with StarCraft 2 like so many other people did and throw money at it and then disappear after some years and then come back and apparently throw more money at it and then disappear again. And like this is a problem with a lot of these people at the heart of these kinds of projects. It's not very common at all to see somebody who's actually willing to throw money at something, especially in the thousands of dollars of range. I saw a breakdown of some of the money he had spent already, and it was actually kind of absurd considering what he got out of it, which was assets that were unanimated, unrigged, had no normal maps on them. It's like he just bought stuff off a Turbo Squid without any real regards to what he was doing, which is basically precisely what he did. Apparently commissioning people to make stuff who were also incompetent and having no idea what to actually commission from them. Like, if you're making a game and you're outsourcing to a studio like Blizzard does, you would say, hey, I need this and this and this and this. I need everything set up this way so we can just pop it in and be done with it. Well, he never did any research like that whatsoever. And it always just seemed to me like none of those people ever actually had any interest in custom content. They just wanted to be identified as like an authority over it. So I don't know what he works, like what he does to make all this money to throw it around. But I actually talked to him on voice chat at one point during the second bout of him showing up and asking me to do stuff for him, and then he would just disappear off of face of existence afterwards. After having me sign an NDA for a project he never actually evidently had any interest in doing anything with. It was Legacy of the Confederation 2 or whatever. And that he ended up hiring a 15-year-old to do work for him that obviously went places because it's totally finished and polished. And what he showed was not a horrendous, embarrassing mess that he placed on Facebook instead of on CC to begin with. Even though he had a project subforum on CC, he decided to start posting stuff on Facebook as if people use Facebook for their fucking projects or something. Like, schizophrenia. This guy throws all this money at shit and he has no idea what the fuck he's even doing. And you're probably going to find this theme all throughout analysis of all these various communities, is none of these people are actually really interested in making projects at all.
Well, I'm on the Facebook page, and boy, is it a doozy. Take note of three. Well, so yeah, I'm looking for the financial report, and I'm not finding it, but I hope I can stumble upon it while we're talking about this, because it is actually really funny to finally put some numbers to this. For those of you who don't
might have it somewhere.
Okay, if you are able to locate it during the podcast, I'll definitely be able to throw it up. But it's just insane to me that anybody would spend money on a StarCraft 2 project without actually having it finished. Like, this is something Mesk and I are
first.
Right. Well, this is something Mesk and I are totally in the same like sort of boat. What's the term? Philosophically, design oriented wise. Like, if you're going to involve other people in your project, ideally you have at the very least a roadmap and experience that dictates you will complete your work. Not literally doing nothing with no past experience, no past demonstration of working within this engine. Like, sure, he's made campaigns in Brood War regardless of their quality, but he's never made anything in StarCraft 2 that we've seen. Never completed anything. And so it doesn't matter if you're spending money at that. It's clear, obviously, it's literally never finished. So, of course, it's easy to say this with some degree of, hindsight. But I really think it's a crazy pivot to go to StarCraft 2, an engine you've never worked in, from the start, require other people, so you've got that overhead going on, spending money on a project where obviously you're not going to make any return, like that's not why you're doing it, but you're doing that from the beginning. Like, from the formation of this project, you're spending money on it and involving other people without having a proper roadmap necessarily. Maybe you've dreamed up some storyboards, maybe you've got some storyline planning or whatever for the actual campaign storyline, but nothing that we saw, anyways, would indicate that he put in the requirements before you start involving other people. And this is why projects like this always get fucking doomed. They're always doomed to just fall over and die after a while and quietly whimper into out of existence.
The best part of it is that this what prompted his second appearance in StarCraft 2, the one in which I created that video that detailed what you needed to do for StarCraft 2 assets and got into actually like showing him and telling him what he needed to do and stuff like that, is this came as a result of a thread on CC in which we were all collectively bashing these really, really shitty projects for StarCraft 2, most namely StarCraft Universe, that had an alleged $90,000 or something scrounged up on Scamstarter, and not a single dime actually went into producing the project, down to the point that all their assets are just very, very shittily kit-bashed World of Warcraft stuff,
Yeah.
and they've never produced anything respectable whatsoever. So he comes in there and he's like, oh, well, this is how you spend money on a project. I'll show you guys how you make a project with $90,000 and be really successful about it. So there's like that extra bit of irony in which he actually willfully threw money at this and came up with even less than they did.
Yeah, that's impressive. So, Dynamo has seen the original Legacy of the Confederation. Could you imagine for a second... Yes, could you imagine for a second that after Legacy of the Confederation 1, 2, past purposes, all that stuff from Brood War, that you would then live in the reality where the next time you hear about the creator of those campaigns is him throwing thousands of dollars at a StarCraft 2 project? Could you ever imagine in a million years?
Well, I actually remember seeing a project page, if I'm not mistaken, for Legacy of the Confederation 2 on the CS2 Mapster site. I'm pretty sure it was advertised there, and that was actually the first time I ever saw it. But it seemed like one of those, long roadmap projects. I never really investigated it at the time. I only recently found out that it was one of the original StarCraft campaigns. But it always seemed to be, when I first saw it, one of those overly ambitious projects that just details a bunch of planet stuff, but never really actually makes anything. So even when I first saw it, I was like, okay, this is just some guy's pipe dream that's never going to get anywhere. And from what I understand, that is in fact what ended up happening. But yeah, like the fact that so much money was spent on this might actually be a good argument against capitalism, like the best argument ever made by anyone, like beyond what any socialist ever said. But yeah, it just speaks for a person who has no interest in actual custom content, as Mesk said. He's only interested in either having some sort of authority in the community, but I don't even think that's the case. Because if that was the case, then why would they just disappear for random long periods of time and then just arbitrarily come back and demand more stuff to be done? Like, I don't think it's even a question of standard. It's just the fact that he really didn't care about the game itself. He just wanted to do whatever he felt like doing at the time, but without any commitment to it. So he basically wanted to do everything and nothing at the same time, if that makes sense. Like, I don't consider him to be a custom content creator. I just consider him to be someone who wanted to make his visual novel or whatever in StarCraft, and then decided to do the same thing in StarCraft 2, but since it was way harder to work with, he didn't bother. Like, that's my takeaway. I don't think he is. I don't think he's the person that we should look for when it comes to main content creators. Like, I'm pretty sure you said that every single map in Legacy of the Confederation was released in 1999, sorry?
The first campaign was released in 99. Maybe the second one was too. I don't remember. I just know that the last one was 2001, I believe. So I think maybe the last two were both 2001.
Yeah, and even that, like, the story was finished actually by Desolate and a bunch of other people. So, like, that alone shows that this guy, Oracle, I think, really has no consistency, no interest in actually making a project that's finished and playable. So I think the problem here isn't so much people like him, because, like you said one day, you can just make whatever you want. Like, when you are modding, this is basically your toy box. You can create whatever the hell you want to create. Like, there's nothing wrong with creating the most insane bullshit you can think of. Of course, then once you actually publish it, then you should expect the backlash you deserve if it's shit. But in this case, the main problem, I think, is the fact that the communities in question really didn't care so much about quality. You had these really awful projects like Legacy of the Confederation, Life of a Marine, Flame Knives, or Eon of the Hawk, and so on and so forth, all of these were praised by most of the StarCraft communities I visited, even back in the day, like back in 2008. Like every time I looked up StarCraft custom content, those were always the names that pop up. Maybe you can blame Google for that rather than any specific person. Maybe just the algorithm decided to publish those instead. But to me,
No,
what
it's
it
not
seems like,
Google's fault.
yeah, to me, what it seems like it's simply the fact that the communities themselves are responsible for the creation of these projects because they never cared about standards. They never cared about having an actual RTS production that is of quality. Instead,
Absolutely.
They just pushed forward these utterly abominable pieces of garbage. Like I think this is really a case of collective fault. Like Mesk, for example, has shown that back in the day he was actually making way better stuff than most of these people. Not only in terms of the custom country that it had way more custom assets, for example, but also in terms of actual modding. Instead of just relying on hacky triggers that are not even hyper triggers. So yeah, it's just a shame that in the case of StarCraft, it seems like there's been this collective surrender. Like the entire community, like Campaign Creations and a few others, just decided not to promote RTS content, which is the same thing that Blizzard eventually did by promoting custom maps like the Chameleon Pirates one. I don't remember what it's called, Infiltration or something. The map were made by designer Dave.
Yeah,
And then, of course,
who knows the name? It doesn't. Deception, I think. It doesn't matter. I know what you mean, though.
Yeah. So yeah, I think it's really a case of collective fault. Like,
yeah,
they
Definitely.
makes sense.
They didn't want to make RTS and they didn't want to advertise RTS. So it's no surprise we never got any.
I just think it's so crazy to me that people's favorite StarCraft campaigns are not campaigns that they're not campaigns for one. They're not RTS content. They're like weird micro anime novels and stuff. And like literally Vision of the Future obviously is actually an anime, but you look past that and you just get fucking blindsided by the absolute like overdramatic just insane stuff that it's so small scale in nature and it's meant to be very intimate in that sense. It's actually just ridiculous and unbelievable by nature. And
it's not even micro.
Well, yeah, it doesn't even actually require you to micro is another valid criticism, I would say. And that's just something that...
one part in your videos the other day. I think it was LATC. And now you can correct me if I'm wrong. I think there's a part where it's just like Zergian is just spawning in giant blocks in front of battlecruisers.
Yeah, that sounds like many different maps in Legacy of the Confederation. So you're gonna have to be a bit more specific.
This isn't like a fever dream. Like that was real, right? Like that's actually something they put in the game where it's just you have battlecruisers and Zerg just appear on top of you.
Yeah, I mean the same thing happens with other races too. Like there's a map where you're sitting there defending for some unknown amount of time, and then you get a giant square that one-shots every unit in the game. And that's like your reward for waiting, but you don't know how long you're waiting for, and the only engagement is like every 5 minutes a couple of battlecruisers spawn, and you have to kill them. So like for most of it, you're doing nothing. You're literally sitting there doing nothing, and that is Legacy of the Confederation in a nutshell. There's also a really insane map, just to add to the fever dream nature, where you have to micromanage an elevator. And what I mean is, you literally have to stand on a beacon in one room to activate, to like unlock an elevator, and then go and bring your units to that elevator and wait for the elevator to finish. Don't press escape or you'll break the triggers, by the way. And then after that, if you want to go back to the same way, you got to make sure your other civilian is still on the same beacon. And then there's another area that you have to access with a different civilian, or like use a different civilian. It's like beacons out the fucking wazoo. And like this is like people like this. People like that.
You know, when I picked up StarCraft when it came out back in 1998, and I started making maps and stuff for it, never in my wildest fantasies, in my deepest, darkest, I imagine we would be looking at an age where people are not making RTS maps in an RTS game. Like that to me at the time was so fucking unfathomable. Like the extent that I played non-RTS and saw non-RTS at the time was like Zergling Blood and God's Land and MTG Arena when that came out. But the fact that we would turn away from that and enter this wacky psychedelic arena where people don't even make macro stuff at all. Like I always found that so bizarre because it's a fucking RTS. If you wanted to make something small scale and micro intensive, this is not the platform you do it on. You go to like UT99 or Quake or Doom or any of the other better solutions than trying to turn an RTS into something it isn't. But now here we are.
Yeah. I think it's just better to make it in StarCraft, actually, because I like StarCraft, and I know how to use the editor in StarCraft, sort of. Not really, but I know. And, actually doing work is too much work, so.
What I find interesting, actually, is that for most of the custom campaigns you've played, there's so many elements that are consistent between them. So, for example, the scene you described earlier with the giant square and the battle cruisers, that could easily have been any of the campaigns you've played. Could have been
yeah, I see what you're saying.
Could have been Flame Knives. It could have been Life of a Marine. It could have been any one of them. Like, these campaigns rip each other off left and right. And it's funny because I think it was the anime campaign, Vision of the Future, where in one of the very last maps, it's literally the tower defense default Blizzard map, like the one where you have to defend the Nexus. That was literally made into an actual story-based map without changing any of the gameplay or anything.
Yeah, they changed some of the units they used, and that was it.
And it's literally the same idea as the Legacy of the Confederation map with the giant square unit. Like, it's pretty much the same exact concept. You are on a tiny space platform, and you have to use pre-place defenses to destroy spawned-in units that all attack from the same angle without any sort of strategy or movement or anything.
Oh yeah, and anytime dropships show up, you know that there's just a trigger that detects a dropship at a location and immediately spawns in like 16 supply worth of units. So that's great. Like, that definitely, you could definitely fit like 8 siege tanks in one dropship, buddy. Okay.
So there's so much overlap between these campaigns, is what I'm saying.
Yeah,
it's not like you had Oracle who is mentally ill or whatever. That's fine. Not every single human being has to be sane, right? Yeah. Otherwise, these campaigns would not exist. But then you had people who looked at this work and said, "Okay, I'm going to try to one-up this guy, but not in the sense of making a quality production, in the sense of making something that is effectively in the same exact style, except even worse at times." Like, there was never any attempt to making a project that's more sensible. Like, some in Legacy of the Confederation are literally copied one-to-one in Flame Knives.
That's
like
true.
The proximity beam with the Dragoon. Like, if you get close to him, you die. That's used in Flame Knives as well. Like, at no point was any of the stuff that happened used as a guide of what not to do when making a custom campaign. They just keep reinforcing the same concept over and over and over. And I think that's an even bigger tragedy than just having Legacy of the Confederation exist by itself.
Well, what you would think would happen, and this plays into the whole gatekeeper thing you mentioned a while ago, is what you think would happen is people look at the standards someone has set, like a campaign with voice acting and custom assets and shit, and they'd be like, okay, so this is what people expect, and I want my project to be successful, and I want to make something I can be proud of, so I'm going to one-up this guy. I'm going to make stuff higher quality and more polished and improve. So even if the original campaign was, well, questionable with square units, maybe the next campaign would be a little bit better, but it just always goes downhill. It's always just regressing over and over and over and over and over and over until the absolute pinnacle of regression today in StarCraft 2, where literally every example I have seen of custom content in that game has been a goddamn disaster.
Well, I hope you'll join me for my Annihilation playthrough sometime soon. But what I will say is, the thing is, we did just talk about how Legacy of the Confederation is the worst, but The difference maker to me is that it actually did have, you can't argue that it took effort to make that stupid fucking elevator mission where he like just cobbled a billion triggers together and however the fuck he made it. Like, you can't argue that it didn't take a lot of time. You can argue that it was in service to something retarded. You can argue that it was really dumb. Yeah, and I will agree with every single one of your points. Like, I definitely think it was infuriating and terrible, but you can't argue that it was, it did take some time. And that to me is like,
theme.
Yeah, that to me is the big thing, is these other campaigns that came after they're like hollow interpretations of that, where yes, they don't achieve the same heights of infuriating the player. They don't annoy the player as much. They aren't as terrible, objectively speaking, but they also don't have as much work put into them. And that's where it really confuses me, because none of them have custom assets. The vast majority of campaigns don't have any modding, any custom assets, and any voice acting. And I don't mean like modding in the sense where you actually are adding to the tech tree. I mean, most of them don't have mods. They're just maps. And this is StarCraft, where modding has been possible forever, literally since 1998. And you can't even do that? Like, you can't even have custom.
It's been in the game for years, and how many people even make use of it?
Yeah, there's I can count the number of campaigns I've played on one hand that have had noticeable AI changes, and that's literally like Vision of the Future. That's it. That's it, man.
Nope. And this brings me to it makes me think of Age of Wonders 2. So I did a fair bit of modding for Age of Wonders 2, and a very, very friendly community, lots of good people in it. But there's only one guy who really went out of his way to really do a lot of graphics ports for it. So Age of Wonders 2 is a lot like Heroes Might Magic 4. You can think of Heroes Might Magic 3, but without stacks of units, but it's still very similar. You have towns and stuff like that. So it's isometric, which means you can do stuff like port over Diablo graphics and stuff like that. So only one guy really got into this. Now, as everybody knows, when you render something or rip something or whatever, and you put it in a game like StarCraft or Heroes Might Magic, whatever, you want to turn off perspective. You want to turn off perspective so you don't get warping. But nobody ever does that. Like, it's the single most important thing you notice. You spin around your battle cruiser, you spin around your custom asset, you're going to notice fuck right off the bat if you've got perspective on. Well, a lot of people in StarCraft 1 didn't understand that. They would go through the effort of making these custom assets, these custom models, learning how to slap things together in Rhino 3D and Lightwave and shit like that in 3ds Max, and then they wouldn't even turn off fucking perspective, and they'd end up with this warped-ass pile of shit, like all these people converting StarCraft 2 stuff in present day have never actually looked at what they're fucking doing at all. But this is a guy who ported fucking everything. Fucking everything under the sun, Diablo, Civilization 3, whatever, but also assets from World of Warcraft. Now, when you think of porting something from a very easily accessible 3D format like World of Warcraft, you think, oh, I'm going to put that in the 3ds Max. And you don't even need to be skilled at it. You can do what I did, which is just spit out one string of frames, and then another string of frames, another string of frames, and use like a VBS script that somebody else made to arrange them in the arrangement you need to actually get them in the game. But no, this guy, you want to know what this guy did? This guy fraps. I believe he frapsed or used another video recorder of the model viewer. No. And then ripped frames out of the video. And then use those frames for the unit.
Hey, that's what some people make. They take the StarCraft 2 portraits and they just record it in game and turn them into.
That is what these people are doing for those StarCraft 1 mods, by the way. I'm 100% sure that's what they're doing, because they looked so fucking bad and their aspect ratio crushed and everything.
Yeah.
The Korean stuff that somebody linked from ModDB with a horrible tinting and stuff like that, their shit is aspect ratio crushed. You just don't get that out of 3ds Max unless you're doing something really, really wrong, or unless you're recording stuff out of a fucking viewport with a video thing and then ripping frames out of that, which is what this guy did. So this guy put in a Herculean amount of effort to do this. This is a lot of tedious work. It's probably about 3 to 4 times the amount of work that I would have put into something spread across like 10 times the amount of man-hours. Because you have to record the video, you have to align it as pixel perfect as you can within this viewport, and then record it, and then rip shit out of the video frames, and then crop it, and then color correct it, and anything else you're going to do, which they never did. And at the end of the day, the final product is still warped because it's perspective. You can't even do orthographic in those viewers at all. Like, you mentioned about these people going through these extraordinary efforts to do things wrong. And it's a repeating thing I see fucking everywhere. Like, even recent times, the Antioch Chronicles, they went through extraordinary amounts of efforts in that awful tug of war map, and it wasn't even functional on modern hardware. You couldn't even play it. Like, you can't even get to the point of assessing whether it's actually worth the effort or not, because it's not even functional. It just performs like absolute shit. And no point did anybody going through the ridiculous amount of effort it takes to populate all this shit, just even populating it, not even triggering it or whatever. At no point did anybody stop and think, maybe this will perform badly for most of our players. Maybe I should consider a different approach. No, nobody stopped and thought that. They went through the agonizing, tedious amount of fucking effort it took to literally bathe themselves in their own diarrhea.
My soul burns.
My soul burns.
I can't believe that, dude. After that was the icing on the cake for that 2 FPS mission. Just hearing.
This is the other thing.
My soul
same project
burns.
They go through the effort of trying to find all these voice actors who are at least, old talent from the previous campaign, or somebody who's comparably similar to the old talent, whether they're good or not. And they don't even hand them a real script.
No, yeah, they actually, all of the unit responses for all of those guys were all the same line. So every single one of them said, my soul burns. So.
Yeah.
It's great. A+.
And then there's their cinematics.
Oh.
Now, you can imagine it takes some time to put this kind of shit together with an editor as clunky as StarCraft 2. And the end result is, at the absolute best of times, comedic. Every other time, just embarrassing, impossible to follow, and requires a fucking cipher to try to figure out what it is they're even trying to portray to begin with. So you gotta ask the question, why don't you invest your man hours and your time and your motivation and whatever tiny filaments of interest you actually have in making a campaign into the campaign itself, instead of these pseudo animations that don't accomplish anything and are just gross and unsightly.
Oh, I can answer that question. That's just because this is really going to blow your mind if you don't already know, but campaigns with custom cutscenes are received better. Literally the reason.
Yeah, I can believe that, sadly.
Well, I mean, it goes back to some more very specific things about that project, where how they were worried about other campaigns being released. They felt way more personal about the project than they ought to have.
That's pretty funny.
Yeah, they were accelerating their say they were getting stressed out over time investment and stuff, and not because not just because they had been working on it for a long time and it wasn't done yet, not just because of those things, which are pretty natural for any developer, but also because of other people in the community, quote unquote, releasing quote unquote content.
Community, quote unquote. As if to imply StarCraft 2 at any point ever had an actual community. Man, StarCraft is such a huge subject if you wanted to talk about communities, because StarCraft 2 is so fucking weird. I don't know if any other game is like this. If any other game is home to such a impotent, useless collection of people who are so cucked as Blizzards. Because, okay, you got StarCraft 1. And you have Legacy of the Confederation and anime and all this other shit. And you have, most of these people just jump ship or whatever. And some people stick around like RCX and actually put in the effort to do whatever it is they want to do. But most people jump ship. And then Warcraft 3 comes out. And Warcraft 3 is like, oh, wow, we're going to have a whole bunch of new custom campaigns. We're going to be able to play all this user content again, which in their eyes is a positive thing. And then nothing happens. Nobody does anything. The whole Destler Joel thing and the .com incident and their really, really goofy demo map, that was the first actual legitimate effort by anybody in that entire collection of people other than Razorclaw X at making something in Warcraft 3. There's literally nothing else unless you count maybe like Warbringer's recolor mod that helped him get into Blizzard, I guess. And
oh man,
it was just recolors, just okay. But no, the vast majority of people would look at Warcraft 3 and then they would come up with some excuse why they don't make something in it, like, oh, I don't really like the Warcraft setting, or oh, the editor is not as good. And I mean, the latter is a legitimate excuse, but the kind of projects that they're making, they're not going to actually run into the issues with Warcraft 3 that the people who want to make, like, I'd say, an RTS would run into. Like, Warcraft 3 doesn't support RTS gameplay. Its engine doesn't work with it. The editor doesn't give you the tools for it, and it's an absolute fucking shit show to figure everything else on your own, like making the AI. No, none of these people were interested in doing that to begin with. So that wasn't really the issue. The issue was they couldn't have an easy, get out of jail free card, make some escalators that you have to put civilians on beacons and shit, whatever. They didn't have any way of actually getting into this. That's like really strange. I found that really strange because I'm not entirely 100% sure what led to like the formations of campaign creations and the initial, campaigns that set the stage. But it was a stage nobody ever actually willfully tried to obtain again. Nobody would ever try to put in that amount of effort to have, custom music and custom voice acting and stuff again. Like RCX is really the only one. And nobody even tried to follow that example. Instead, we ended up with Hive Workshop and Warcraft 3 Campaigns.net, I think it was, prior to Hive Workshop, which then was assimilated into it, where they just released porn mods, and that's how they got all their initial traction off of. And then, the same repeat with StarCraft 2. I still remember when StarCraft 2 was first announced, on Vent, we had people I hadn't seen in over a fucking decade. We had, like, Night Fox and other people in from Star Alliance that I didn't even know even were still alive anymore. People who didn't even like necessarily make projects but were a part of the community. And I've never seen them again since. StarCraft 2 came out. All these people crawl out of the woodworks to try to like hook onto it, hoping that they would get to relive their glory days. And well, it doesn't take any imagination to see what came of it. The whole Oracle mess is really like the only actual thing to even like remotely come out of it. Is that, a guy spent money on something that was a complete and total embarrassment. And that was it. And that was it. And this was the community, or at least the name, the brand that had defined StarCraft 1, other than maybe like InfoScepter would be like a runner-up.
Well.
And you look at it and you just like wonder, like, communities are fucking stupid.
That does tend to be the case. The thing is, like, oh, go ahead.
I think they kill themselves.
On the subject of man hours, when it comes to actually putting effort into your production, most of these people, like even Metatron, for example, must have spent a long time making flame knives, as the game is so fucking huge. But this is actually an interesting parallel with Retribution. So if we ignore Retribution's commercial nature, like many of the maps, as you said in the review, really must have not taken more than 1 day to make. And that's actually stretching it. It's probably like 1 hour for some of them.
Oh, yeah.
Yet they actually provide a more enjoyable experience, comparatively speaking, than most of the productions that you actually played on stream. So at this point, it's not about how much effort you place into your campaign. You simply have to ask yourself, is what I'm making even a game? Am I making something that's meant to be played, to be interacted with, to engage the player? And I think the answer to that is no. That's not actually what's going on here. So I don't think effort even matters. Like, in my view, the fact that they spend so long making Flame Knives or Legacy of the Confederation or Antioch Chronicle 3 or whatever is the equivalent of them just smashing their head on a wall for a month. Like, I don't think effort matters as much as the final product does. And if you manage to make something that's fun and enjoyable, and you manage to make it in a day, like, that in itself is a much more important achievement than anything that these people have ever made. Like, they should never be commended for the effort they have put into whatever they made, because it just doesn't lead to anything in the end. It just makes you wonder even more what the fuck they were doing with all that time.
No, I think the reason why we commend effort, despite obviously the end result being objectively terrible.
It's general sentiment. I'm not saying you specifically.
No. I'm providing like a counter argument, anyways. Is the idea behind the whole you put effort in and we can see that even though it was in service to something terrible. We're not saying that's a good thing, but we are saying that at least they did put in effort. Like, you can see that. You don't get that feeling from Retribution, for example, even though it is an objectively better experience. You don't get that feeling from any of the campaigns that came like after. Besides, like, obviously a few outliers, pretty much after 2002, you didn't really see any projects, any campaigns that had any degree of effort put into them. And that is irrespective of the objective quality of the end result. The fact that we got so few campaigns with voice acting, and most of them did concentrate around campaign creations, does lend a little bit of credence to Mesk's statement there, where he says that, you know, this is the source of a lot of the quality of the project. You know, this is the source of a lot of the standards of any community. It's like, that's pretty much as high as it got, is at least you have some custom assets in your custom content. And that does require effort, and that is irrespective of the objective quality of those individual assets, the how they work together in a complete scene, and what the end result holistically looks like. I do agree that it's not something that should, like, absolves them of any of the responsibility of being a developer in the first place. Like, obviously, I don't think that. But it is something where I think it's deserving of some recognition, even if it's not actual praise. Because so few developers, even if they ended up making higher quality productions after this, like, they didn't get to that point again. And at that point, the only reason their projects were of a higher caliber in terms of the gameplay experience is just because they didn't intercept the the gameplay of StarCraft. They didn't obfuscate that. They didn't obstruct the player's ability to play StarCraft as much as Legacy of the Confederation and Flame Knives and Eon of the Hawk. They didn't do any of that. And as a result of not doing that as often or at all, they made a higher quality production, but they didn't try to do anything of their own either. And I think that a healthy balance would be doing something custom, implementing new tech trees, implementing new voice acting, implementing new whatever, and then being able to come away from that and say, you know, I've done something custom. Maybe there is some interception of the main gameplay. Maybe there is some obfuscation of that, but at least I can learn, and I can improve on that standard, and people can expect something custom in the future and not just basically a reskinned melee map with some different objectives, which may very well be what the end result of all of my work totals out to, is a melee styled experience. But it's very clear that there's a bunch of custom assets going into it, and it's full voice acted, and all this stuff that should be a consistent element in StarCraft's history, especially given where it originated from, how Campaign Creations did pride itself on having full voice acting and some custom assets, custom portraits, whatever. Like, this is something that should be the baseline, is having a couple of new tech tree items and introducing them in a sensible manner, proper level design, and full voice acting, and whatever else you can scrounge up. Like, that shouldn't be the anomaly. And I feel like that's a really big issue, is that is the anomaly in StarCraft, and it seems to be completely absent in something like Warcraft 3 or StarCraft 2, where, yeah, you'll get some weird kit bashes here and there, but outside of some of the graphics, obviously Warcraft 3 has a lot of custom assets, though none of them are any good. And outside of that, you're not really going to see anything actually custom. And even it's kind of a stretch to even call the Warcraft 3 stuff custom as well. It's a bit of a different comparison, I guess. But we never see, like, fully voice acted, new tech tree, all these different productions. Just look at Arcane, for example. It supposedly has all these new, like, brand new tech trees, but they're all the same fucking shit, and they all use stock unit responses. So you're just moving around Arthas as like a captain or something. Like, why? Where's the custom shit? Like, where is it? It's the same stuff. So it's a mix of making sure that your work is in service to something proper, your effort is in service to something that is of some objective caliber, and that does learn from the previous entries into the custom content that you're, like, making, not really sequels, but, like, you're being inspired by, you're taking samples from. It's an element of that. But you also have to consider the problem of the fact that, like, most people don't put any effort into that. So you got to balance the effort with the intention, and making sure that your intention lines up with what the actual engine is capable of, what is appropriate for this genre, and also what efforts you have, what resources you have to make that a reality.
Right. Although
the other thing is, go ahead.
I think this, in the end, it just underlines the main difference. Retribution is not a mod. They didn't do any modding. Whereas Legacy of the Confederation, Flame Knives did actually edit the exe file. And for a project that didn't do any modding, Retribution actually did make an effort to, present creative mission objectives, even if they're not very good at all. Like, I think the takeaway is that Dessler and company, like, I don't even remember the names of most of the creators, Dessler, Metatron, and Oracle, that's pretty much it. And these people did not want to make mods. They did modding only insofar as it helped their advertisement for what the campaign claimed to be. Like, they didn't actually want to use modding to actually mod the game, to actually develop the game, to actually do what you said, like add the new tech trees, stuff like that. Like, I think maybe Vision of the Future did that a little bit, but I could be wrong there.
No, yeah,
Maybe
they had a couple of changes, and they did have a couple of new tech trees in the total conversion.
It was the only one.
It's definitely an outlier.
So, in the case of Retribution, it's actually just a level pack. It's like a collection of missions that you download off the internet, and you play on any StarCraft version. You don't even need Broodwar for it. But in the case of modding, it's just a case of modding not being done for the purpose it should. So it's actually a case of people not wanting to make a production. I think that's really the takeaway from this. Like, I know we always talked about it. Like, we said several times that none of these people wanted to make RTS content. But I think in general, they just didn't want to make a game. They didn't want to make something that you play and you enjoy. Like, even Life of a Marine, for example. Most of the maps involve just going around caves and searching every nook and cranny for fucking beacons. It had absolutely no content whatsoever.
Yeah. Well, that was the production that I finally broke and just ran it at like double speed. That was the only way I could tolerate it. So just some color if you missed that.
Yeah.
So something I was going to mention real quick is when I talk about the time that people put into stuff, I'm not praising them at all. I always point that out in reviews whenever people have very evidently spent a long time something, because it's actually a really, really bad thing. There is a lot of mismanaged time, even in really, really successful projects. Like my Retribution, not whatever the abomination you're talking about. I spent a long time revising particles because I was learning. So I would have to constantly go back and fix stuff. But a lot of people end up investing a lot of time into something without actually really learning anything. Like, for example, the guy that was putting the graphics for Age of Wonders 2 never, ever put any actual time into researching how to properly render them, so everything was fucked by perspective. So, he put in all this time and he ended up with garbage anyways. It was just like an absolute catastrophe. And then, obviously, with stuff like Antioch Chronicles 3, they put in all this, like, very evidently a lot of time into engineering a lot of these user interface elements. And then they didn't even end up with anything that had anything even remotely resembling gameplay afterwards. Every opportunity they had to make gameplay, they just opted out of it. Instead, you ended up with what were very, very obvious time sinks for people to just dump time into without actually making a campaign. It is terrible. Like time management is really, really important, because even if you're super, super, motivated and passionate about something, if you end up investing a lot of time into something and you come out at least not learning anything out of it, it's really bad. And pointing that out in the review process is always like, well, this guy put a lot of time into something and he still ended up with shit. And that is like basically every Warcraft 3 campaign I've seen.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, it's clearly taken some time for Sharadundra to slap together Arcane, pre-place 1 billion units, tell the AI to build 1 unit and attack you with it, and expect you to stay in the map for 6 hours. That I'm not even saying that I like sarcastically. That obviously does take some time, but not really in service to anything worthwhile, and definitely.
It also makes you ask, like, do they have no fucking self-awareness at all? Like, do they not even like stop and look at their shit that they're doing?
Dude, this guy responded to somebody telling this guy, listen,
good use of my time.
Sharadundrid looks at fucking orc porn. So don't talk to me about his standards. He literally said it to a guy, don't bring your standards to my campaign. This guy has no fucking standards.
Wow, the fact
he actually, I'm not making that up, man. He said,
I remember saying,
I trust you will keep your standards away from Arcane. And that's where that spawned a whole different meaning to him, man. Like, wow. And every time you look at that guy, he gets funnier, because after that was the orc porn.
Hey man, sometimes you just want Thrall to wrap you in his burly, alcohol-drenched razor blades and edge you to the place where few men have traveled before.
Hell yeah. Smoke.
It's also interesting that Arcane was made years after the quote-unquote golden age of Warcraft 3 modding, like long after the game was relevant. I don't think there was ever any golden age for it, but like it's a very recent production, and it's already considered to be one of the main projects for the community.
It's a hosted project on Hive Workshop, alongside such classics as the 2-player campaign and
that's not
the
like
Warden
RPG.
RPG.
A pinnacle of quality.
Yeah.
Like, there's a reason why they just merged from Warcraft3.net and War3 Search, which were just basically like buckets for people to just like squeeze a deuce into as they're passing by.
That's a pretty apt description.
There is not even a slightest shred of standards on any of those sites at all. The stuff I have seen posted on those websites would get you banned from any reasonable forum.
Yeah, well, now that's like illegal or something, so they have to keep it. At least that's the only reasonable solution I can come up with, is that they would just get sued or something. And I don't know, some EU cuck law. Maybe they actually opt into it, though. Who knows?
Just blanket IP ban their entire country. It'll probably save you in the long run anyways.
The continent of Europe.
The continent of New Islamistan.
Can't believe that. I just can't. I'm always flabbergasted when I see stuff about Warcraft 3. So we've talked a couple of different topics here, and among them has been a consistent through line of a lack of standards. Very obvious. Like, even if it wasn't about the standards, it was certainly like that was one of the reasons why these projects exist at all, is that there was no standards. So of course it has something to do with it. And one of the things that I always come back to is the idea that, like, I find myself slipping up in my reviews of stuff, and I say, like, well, this is what you would expect. And then I remember, oh yeah, I'd never expect that for real. That's just like the ideal situation. Because of course you don't fucking expect actual content. Not in this fucking town. And so that's kind of an issue, is like, even I have been sort of not really gaslit, I don't know what term just desensitized to the idea that there is no content, and I'm not going to be playing any content, and I shouldn't look for content. That's not an expectation anymore. And that's sick. Like, that is actually fucked up, that's a reality, you know? So I don't know what you guys think about this. Like, is this something that has been something that you've experienced in other communities, where it's actually the norm to have nothing of value anywhere? Or am I just alone here in this fucking shit show, in this void?
Well,
I don't
there's a Sins mod where the guy ported Zerg units from StarCraft 2 without any specularity and called them ships.
No.
I got beer real quick.
Well, Dynamo, that puts the floor to you.
Well, it's kind of hard to remember, as I've casually been involved in a lot of communities, like the Rayman 1 community, for example, where there used to be a forums called Betilla Gardens. I'm pretty sure it's long offline now. But there used to be some people who posted the Photoshop of their level plans, because the game was not really moddable enough to allow to import custom graphics. So what people would do is they would Photoshop them in and say, okay, so if the modding tools ever get advanced enough, this is what I want my level to look like. And that is probably the closest comparison I can make for the idea that no matter where you go, you will not find any custom content. But in that case, it was due to engine limitations. So I don't think it's really the same idea. They still did have a bunch of cool level packs done with the original game's graphics. So it's not like they even did try to do some modding. Like, they enabled some stuff from the game files that didn't show up in the original game. But yeah, it's definitely not a problem that happened because of design choices by the modders, which is the problem that I think is at the heart of the sword, at the heart of the StarCraft modding community, where you really get these people who really don't want to to make custom content. They don't want to make an RTS, but they don't even want to make a game. They don't want to make an RPG. Life of a Marine is not an RPG.
Yeah, that was really confusing to me, that it was hailed as or it was marketed as an RPG, but it's nothing. There's no content.
Yeah, exactly. That's the problem. There is no content. It's not even a problem of you are trying to make an RPG, but you don't have you're not modding the game to allow for mechanics that are like an RPG. Like, the entire premise behind the production is not to have gameplay. That is the idea. That is what they have done. They are trying to make a production where you don't play the game. And Vision of the Future is probably the only one that had a few maps where you actually play the game. But otherwise, I'm pretty sure Life of Marine, Legacy of the Confederation, pretty much had nothing except gimmicks. Like, it was just a collection of gimmicks and quick time events.
Yeah.
It was really nothing more than that. So they don't want to make a game, essentially. And I don't think I've seen this anywhere else, except in other Blizzard communities like Warcraft 3 and StarCraft 2. And, all this... when it comes to Warcraft 3, most of the mods I ever saw were like online co-op RPG mods. So maybe it's good for that. I have never actually played any of them. I never even played Dota, so I don't know if it's any good. Maybe it is. I have no way of knowing.
Well, there was nothing like it, so there wasn't really much to learn from, per se. Definitely very rough around the edges, and it's in Warcraft 3's engine, so it's not going to perform well or feel good to play. So, yeah, I don't know. There's probably some purist out there who, if you like MOBAs and you don't like casual games, your options are pretty slim, and Dota 1 is probably the only one. So maybe Heroes of New Earth or something, but most of them are dead. But so
yep, maybe Mesk can weigh in on if he had this problem on other communities.
Yeah. Besides the Sins of a Solar Empire example and that fucking Age of Wonders example that you gave earlier.
What kind of problem?
Just the what I was talking about earlier before you left, when you like you're just conditioned
Nobody has any standards
to not experience
every game.
Every game. Okay.
So I have let me recall the big one. So Age of Wonders 2, I think is probably because it was a small group of people. I think that was probably like the people who had the highest standards, at least as far as like the maps and stuff are concerned. A lot of their map terrain and stuff was really, really good. Supreme Commander was
well, just the community for those games is terrible, so I can't imagine the actual modding community.
So Supreme Commander, of course, was a game where you were criticized and professional players were criticized if they reclaimed stuff while moving because it was too much micro, and micro was bad for a game. And they would say that 150 APM is too much and StarCraft is a click fest. And, well, when you have a community like that at the forefront of your game, obviously the customs community is really bad as well. The only reason they don't have micro maps and RPG maps is because you really can't do anything with an engine as clunky as that. And let me see. So Homeworld 2 is also very bad as well. It's been about 10 years since I did my last research into Homeworld 2, but it really didn't change. So custom AI, I think, is possible to some extent. Would you find information on it? No. Custom particle effects, one of the most basic things. No. There is a lot of like pet projects that were made for that game that had a lot of custom assets that just exploded, and stuff got leaked around here and there, but there's like these things are like slinking around. I have a lot of them that I think don't exist anymore, like Axel. I managed to, I think, pull just about everything out of his FTP. So just thinking about this just makes me fucking die. Okay, so the standards for Homeworld 2, I didn't realize just how bad they were until I was in Sins of a Solar Empire and I was reverse engineering stuff from Homeworld 2. So Homeworld 2 doesn't really have any noteworthy projects at all for it. It's got some conversions here and there, but they're all pretty terrible. But some of the designs of the ships and stuff are kind of interesting. I could take them and maybe refurbish them or whatever. But the problem is that as I would discover, literally every single person who's ever made a model or kit bashed a model for Homeworld 2 built it entirely out of Ngons. So a quick crash course. N-gons don't really work in games because they need triangles. So you have a quad, which is typically what people model in, that gets subdivided into triangles. Well, most of these people don't even do that. They have like some kind of shape that they made and they turned it into like a 200-sided fucking thing. So not only is this incredibly poor performing because they're actually leaving the triangulation process to an automated tool, it is also an absolute fucking disaster to actually deal with and look at. So in order to use any of these models, I had to delete all of the automated generated edges and manually edge them by hand. And I went through at least 5 different meshes from 5 different people who did the exact same fucking thing. It is so unbelievably incompetent to do that. So unbelievably incompetent. I don't even know what they're even making these fucking models in for them to be as fucked up as they are. But they are fucked up. They are fucked. Like, they are just beyond fucked. So that was a real eye-opener, just how shit people who are supposedly at the top of the food chain of Homeworld 2 really are. I think there's only maybe one mesh that was not fucked up, which I think I forget the name of the guy. S something, I think. And yeah, disaster. So obviously, StarCraft 2, Warcraft 3, there was never really any semblance of quality about those whatsoever. Unreal, actually, Unreal's a big one right now. So Unreal 4, a lot of the marketplace is dominated by people who just dumped their Unity assets that they had released in the Unity marketplace into Unreal. They did no configuration for them for Unreal whatsoever. So all the collision and stuff like that is just auto-generated collision. All the textures are really low quality and stuff like that. And most of them don't get updated for new versions of the engine, which is supposed to be actually legally enforced as far as I understand it. But it isn't. So there is a lot of content that's commercially available that you have to pay for that is absolutely trash quality and came off of Unity. So Unreal 4 is really, really bad for that. But also the kind of people that surround Unreal are really bad as well. For example, if you want to make an MMO for that game and you ask any questions, by game I mean engine, if you ask any questions about it, you usually be met by a bunch of people who are like, oh, you can't make an MMO. It's too much for one person. Instead of any actual useful information at all. So people just get driven away by these people who don't actually know anything about making games because it's too much work for them to actually get into actually making anything with the engine. And this is a process that I have been pointing to like dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of times. And there's also a lot of really dumb shit with this community where sometimes people will be working on something that would be incredibly good if it was actually finished, like dynamic world lighting solutions that have bouncing. And then they just decide just to stop it and then not even release the source code for it. So the things like that have also happened all over the place where some people just disappear and take all this stuff with them after getting everybody hyped up on it because it's actually going to be like a really critical thing that could actually be integrated into the game properly or the engine properly. And that disappears. A lot of the companies who license the engine are a lot like that too. Basically, a lot of stuff gets done that would fix a lot of issues with the engine because it definitely has a lot of issues that never actually get back ported. So the community that surrounds Unreal 4 is really, really, really bad. And the community that surrounds Unity is even worse. And they all have sort of intermingled into this incredibly toxic morass. And this extends as well into software products. Like a big example I want to give is Substance Designer, who recently partnered with Adobe. And that is going to be incredibly bad for the end user because Adobe already basically has monopoly over pretty much everything except for, like modeling programs, which Autodesk has monopoly over. And the net result is that none of these programs actually see any meaningful updates whatsoever. And they haven't seen meaningful updates for years and years and years and years, but they keep pushing out new licenses to get more, seat purchases. And the new licenses and the new versions just like rearrange some colors in the interface and make it more bloated. And since there's no competition, every time they buy something like Substance Designer, which is such a huge portion of building, modern art for games and stuff, it just spells doom, because now the prices go up. A lot of solutions for independent developers become more constrained or more expensive or aren't available at all anymore. Adobe is on this big binge of making people subscribe for monthly payments for software, as opposed to just, having, like, say, a student license and just owning it. No, you have to now pay a monthly, which is just unacceptable for actual independent game developers. You can't afford it. It's just way too fucking much. And so that just, encourages piracy. So there's just this massive disconnect in this sort of arena between, the idea of walking into an engine that's freely accessible, that gives you all the tools like Unreal 4, which you have free access to source code, and then actually really being able to break into it. There's this huge barrier, and that is exclusively the community and the people surrounding it, and not even the engine itself.
Yeah, so I think now we can talk a little bit about gatekeeping, because that's a pretty good segue right there. And I think part of it is natural, because you're going to have a community that comes around to a game, and if it lasts long enough, you're going to get a certain amount of sort of segregation that basically stratifies the community across whatever they prefer. So you might have a couple of different sites, like Broodwar did, not really anymore. You might get just the same site, but a couple of different sort of schools of thought within that same site. But either way, the community is going to be split in some different manner. And but generally, I think all members of the community will recognize notable releases, even if they're on different sites or don't agree with the school of thought of the design process or whatever of the person that made the project or the people that made the project. And at some point, the standards do become ingrained. And so that's what I was talking about earlier when I was saying, like, you're conditioned to not expect any content, any standards of any kind. Of course, it didn't have to be that way. You could have, had people who inherited that standard from campaign creations, where I'm going to add custom stuff, I'm going to have voice acting, I'm going to have music, I'm going to have all this stuff. They could have done that, and they didn't. And the why is not super important, but it's more so like, what do you do in a situation where you're in the middle of that community, and it does have some established standard. Like, most people are going to try to work within that mental framework, because for one, it's just easier to wrap your head around, and for another, it's actually like pretty difficult to sort of think outside the box unless you've never been a part of that community, so you don't get those standards ingrained. And most people are like young when they're getting into custom content as well, which compounds the issue. And so gatekeeping, obviously, like, it can be a positive thing. It can be done for a positive manner, where you're keeping out shitty ideas and shitty people and unproductive members. But most of the time, people refer to it using the logic of, like, well, if you're gatekeeping, you're like doing something bad. Like, you're stopping people from being able to get to a certain height, and that would be like map protection and all this other really silly shit, where you're just stopping people who are curious.
What you just described is funny to me, because it's essentially the Doom community in a nutshell. And maybe I can talk a little bit about that without going too much into the detail. But without going too much into details, the Doom community is fairly fractured. There are several different websites, of which the main one is Homeworld. But there was also ZDoom. There was also another board called New Doom. There's a bunch of other different websites, some of which are pretty old by now. But it definitely fits your description of there being several different types of design philosophy. So, for example, Doom is known for defending or promoting, I guess you could say, map packs that tend to use mostly vanilla features. Like, it doesn't really have too many projects hosted on it compared to ZDoom, where there's actual modding of the game involved, and because they tend to prefer more traditional approaches. Now, whether that's a good thing or not isn't really the point, but when you said that notable releases actually get noticed by all members of the community, that's exactly what happens, and there is significant overlap. So, Doom is an open source game. So everything that has always been possible to do for the game has been possible for two reasons. The first reason is that the game was from the beginning intended to be a modding tool. The developer's previous game, Wolfenstein 3D, already had mods made for it as soon as the game was made, and the developers noticed that, and they tried to facilitate the process to make the game easier to mod for their players. And when Doom came out, even like 1 year within the release, people were already able to create custom graphics and custom maps, and that was like in 1993. So it was really primitive technology. Windows was not even out at the time. And this also allowed the creation of the so-called hack, which was a sort of reverse engineered language that you could use to change some of the values of the game. Like you can change a unit speed or attack type or health points, stuff that you can do also in StarCraft modding, for example. And you could have done even back in 1998. And then when the game became open source, it led to the creation of several source ports. Most of these compete with each other because they offer additions to the game engine. So, for example, some of them allowed for scripts, which are not actually a thing in the original game. So they are basically triggers. Others had stuff like room over room architecture, which again was not a feature found in the original, and so on and so forth. Some focused more on the multiplayer aspect, so they had better netcode. And eventually, most of these features were grouped together under a source port that is known as GZDoom, which is the main one today. But you get projects, like one big project that came out recently is called Eviternity. And it is made using the original mapping style. So it doesn't have triggers, it doesn't have room over room, or other stuff that has been possible to do for well over a decade now. But it does actually have modding. It has custom enemies, it has some mapping tricks, I guess you could say, that create more elaborate traps and map design than what the original allowed. So it's sort of a bridge between the new and the old, if that makes sense. And it definitely is something that was praised and noticed by both communities. It was not something that was just exclusive to our website. And most importantly, and really this is the focus of, this is why I'm bringing this all up in the first place, it actually played like the original game. It actually was a production in the same vein. Like if you play it and you go through the entire production, you can actually see not only that it is a high quality mod, they made all new graphics for it. It uses a texture pack that's all new. So the enemies and weapons are still the same, but every single texture has been changed, and there's hundreds and hundreds of custom textures made for it, all of which look really decent. And they try to be creative with it. Like it does have a bunch of stuff that I haven't really seen too much before in a mod. But like I said, they were trying to make something that's in the spirit of the original, and where they changed stuff, they did it for a reason. They did it for reasons that actually matched the gameplay. They didn't just try to, throw stuff at the wall and see what sticks, if that makes sense. They didn't try to make a glorified quick time event and disguise it as a custom mod. And this, I think, is what sets apart the StarCraft and Blizzard in general custom content community from the others. It's definitely like when you ask me if I had ever had any problems with not finding anything good, and I mentioned Raymond, like I said, that was a case that I mentioned for. The only reason that was the case was for technical limitations, because the engine was not capable of having custom graphics. But I've never actually seen anything like what the Blizzard community has to offer anywhere else. I've not played Homeworld or Sins of a Solar Empire, so I don't know about those. But at least for most of the games I've played, like Doom or Wolfenstein 3D or Duke Nukem 3D, for example, or Marathon, that's another one. Like all of them not only have a lot of custom content, but most of it is built into the spirit of the original game. And so I think that's actually a point of success, because it actually means that the people who were working on that were actually trying to continue on the same path as the original developers. They were trying to make, an FPS the same way the original developers did, but try to improve on the formula instead of just doing a retribution, which is a cheap map pack that has no real quality to it, no testing or anything. That's not what they did. And in the case of Doom specifically, there's, like I said, there's this community which tends to favor more traditional gameplay, and you do have weird cases of quote-unquote extremists who say that modding the game is wrong and you should only make levels based on the original rules of the game, and if you change that, then it's no longer the same, and you shouldn't do that.
Startit.net.
I think that's really dumb, but fortunately, it's just a tiny minority, and
Fortunately, they've never done anything notable in their entire careers. Fortunately. Weird coincidence, that. Never would have guessed. Never would have guessed. But yeah, for sure, it's just the whole idea of like that's one of the reasons why I wanted to make this podcast in the first place, is that you don't have StarCraft's community, the StarCraft 1 custom content, like the shit that we've seen, man. And of course, StarCraft 2 has some pretty bad stuff. Warcraft 3 has some pretty bad stuff. But I wonder if they can ever compare to StarCraft 1's like laundry list of embarrassments. And that's kind of one of the reasons I was curious, just like, is there anything nearly as bad as something like Legacy of the Confederation in other entries? But
well, recently I actually played and live streamed, even although it was on Discord, I live streamed it to a friend of mine. A project for Doom that's called Claustrophobia. The walls close in, and it was literally flame knives. It literally was flame knives. It had the fucking boss battles with the particle effects that kill you in one hit if you stand in the wrong square. It had the Final Fantasy music. It had the dialogue without voice acting, which had the most embarrassing script ever made. Like, there's only like it was literally flame knives in FPS form. Like, it just was so funny to me. There was pretty much only one difference. It was only 4 levels, and you can basically play it in an hour.
It wasn't 30 levels. It took me 2 months.
Yeah. Exactly. So that's the only major difference. But otherwise, it was interesting to me because evidently the person who made that, who supposedly is I think his name is Virgil, and he's supposed to be like this important mapper. I don't know. I don't remember what other projects he made. Maybe he made this as a joke. I don't know. But,
you hope?
Yeah, it's funny to me because evidently the design process behind this campaign, behind this mod, was very, very similar to Legacy of the Confederation of Flame Knives, even though it's a completely different genre. Like, they just wanted to make a glorified QuickTime event, and that's what they did. They didn't want to make a game. They didn't want to expand on the original game's formula. They didn't want to innovate. They didn't want to bring anything new to the table. They just wanted to waste your time with stupid-ass dialogue that's not voice-acted. And, just have a all-around miserable experience and try to convince you that it's not, because look at this fancy particle effects done by triggers. Bet you haven't seen that before, huh? That's pretty much the selling point behind productions like Flame Knives or this, I'm pretty sure.
Then they don't use any actual custom particles. It's just
exactly.
Shit.
It didn't have any new custom particles. It was literally just recolored projectiles from the original game. Like, that's all they did. It was not any new. There was not any new graphic for the effects. Just like Flame Knives.
Fantastic.
If you ever get to play Doom, you definitely should stream that mod because it's going to feel very familiar, I assure you.
Oh, I'm sure. Well,
again, that's the difference.
A jump back, though. Oh, go ahead.
This 4 map long thing is just a footnote. Like, nobody even.
Oh, yes. Yeah, of course.
Nobody thinks it's any good.
Yeah, that is a big difference.
StarCraft 2, where people are literally like force-fed diarrhea and beg for more.
Yeah. That is
well,
really
if they survived the StarCraft 2 campaign and they still want more, you know they're degenerates. Just looking at this fucking hosted project list on Hive Workshop, man. By the way, they fixed their website. It doesn't crash my browser every time I try to go there. That's cool. Some progress, guys.
Speaking of websites, maybe you should link the Dessler interview thing, the one where it talks about what people want in projects. That might be interesting.
Oh, yeah, there's a good one. I have to hunt that one down. Let me see if I can find it in my history. Basically, we had some like archived page on Campaign Creations where Dessler was explaining the thought process behind Celestial Eruption, which is just this insane campaign about who knows what the fuck it's about, but it's like Flame Knives' predecessor, like the prequel. It's got all the same sort of shit where you just got cutscenes out the wazoo, no gameplay, micro stuff. There's weird game rules that change every day. Every single map is completely different in terms of how you approach the enemies. There's no consistency. You know, the usual. Why is that the usual? Why is that normal? You know what's really funny to me is that all of these developers for StarCraft 1 custom content, right? They all want a fucking story. They want to be able to say, hey, I made this really epic story. And then like they don't even have a sensible, consistent tone because they just change the rules all the time. And of course there's no investment. Because there's no consistency for what we're playing, then of course we're never going to actually care about the story that they're making. Like, what the fuck? Why?
I'm trying to find a link for that, but...
Yeah, it's in Special Bus somewhere. I'm sure I can find it.
So, in this page you linked, he says, produce awesome games, but he's not making any games. He never claimed he was making any games. He was going to make some maps for StarCraft 2. It's not a game. It's entirely unrelated. Like, you can't claim you're making something you're not. Oh my god, that fucking animation on his main page. That walk cycle. Oh my god, someone was paid for that.
Perfect.
I think
these animations are... Oh my god!
Yeah, I got it. Let me post it.
Throw it in there, man.
That is gross.
Listen, I'm about to teach you the meaning of gross.
His car is fucking textured.
No.
Is he using the 3ds Max render I gave him? It looks like it. For the hazmat guy.
Where's that?
It's on his LATC Mega Update. Fucking 2015.
Oh yeah, that is the hazmat guy.
That looks like the...
Look at the fucking dark... What is that Protoss guy? What is that, man?
I don't know. It's horrible. The green is one shade of color, and that portrait, that's bad. That is a legit bad.
I like how they have the Hellion next to the fucking police car.
Shit, what happens to the... What is... Okay, when you guys look at that second link that Dynamo just posted, do you see white text on a notepad screenshot?
Yeah.
Yeah. What the fuck is wrong with that?
You can't read that!
I can read it.
Maybe
Number 1 in importance, never let a universe you create break its own rules. I mean, this is the fucking guy that made Celestial Eruption, so go fuck yourself, buddy.
But you want to know how I found this? I looked in Special Bus for Ron's skin.
Oh yeah, because if you scroll all the way down, there's some bit where he's like, you can just touch Ron's
It seems so lifelike that if you ran your fingers over your screen, you could feel the texture in Ron's skin. This is talking about...
Listen, the texture of razor blades is not pleasant.
Jesus. It's about some fucking awful custom portrait that he made.
What a fucking disaster.
Yeah, well, I think this is a guide on what to do wrong. Like, if you want to make a custom production and you want to do everything wrong, then you should look at this guide, pretty much.
Like, some of the stuff he says here is literally not something you can argue with, and yet he doesn't do it.
Yeah.
Place fun above all else. All else. Well, maybe you can argue with that. Oh, man.
I have compiled a library of over 1,000 sound and effects. So basically like 1 CD on the average commercial CD.
Yeah. I finally got my hands on the commercial CD Blizzard used. It's great. I gotta look through that at some point. Also, man, I should start playing samples of the fucking Celestial Eruption voice work so you could hear what he's talking about.
God, no. Even on my speakers, it'll be even worse.
Hell yeah.
Oh my god, that 3ds Max screenshot, the edge flow on that. Someone deserves to be fucking beat. Holy shit, that is awful. There's N-gons and everything, and it's all warped. There's floating vertexes and shit. Like, what the fuck?
What are you talking about, Michael Dellon's black head?
Yeah.
What's wrong with his head, dude?
Okay, well, this page is available on the web. How do I see that?
Yeah, I want to see the whole thing too, but I couldn't find it. It was very sad.
But, I mean, like, the edge flow on that is really fucked. Like, if you put something like that in StarCraft 2 or whatever, you would have so many smoothing issues. It would be so messed up.
Pretty unfortunate that we don't get an archive of it. Can't see the whole
in-game
thing.
animation is great, but you don't have any in StarCraft 1. How is it great when you don't even have it?
LOL.
Like, one of the things I never got about these campaigns is that they try to have in-game cinematics in a game you can't actually portray any animation in unless you do a lot of like iScripting and reverse engineering to hook iScript opcodes to triggers, which would be a lot of work that nobody's ever going to do. So why would you half-ass it and create something that's confusing and unintelligible when you could just make a game instead? Like, even in StarCraft 2, you want to make your cinematics within 3ds Max and then use the cinematics editor, quote unquote, with as many fucking parentheses as Oeve will allow to be your front end for that you configure it and then sync it up, and then that's it. Like, you never want to be using in-game stuff if you can avoid it, much less flame knives and all this other shit I've just skimmed that have like 15 minutes of units playing their idle animations while unvoiced text crawls across the screen.
Content.
My favorite was in Ian the Hawk. You had a scene where Fleetwood is supposed to go naked, and the only thing they did is they changed the unit color. Like, it went from green to tan or some shit. But that was their attempt to have the character be naked.
Oh my goodness. That'd be like the easiest sprite to make. You don't even need anything accurate, and it's so small. You just fucking grab an image off the internet and doctor it and toss it in. And there you go. You have something that could be portrayed as a naked individual. Hell, just take the existing graphic and just run it through a fucking filter and color it, and you're done. The people are so fucking lazy. Like, they go through all this time and effort to do things the wrong way, and then when they have the opportunity to do something correct, like the animations on that fucking LATC page, they just don't do it. Like it's always the basic stuff that they just completely fucking ignore. And then they turn around and say, games are art. You put effort in art.
That is pretty fucking annoying.
Developers can't be lazy.
That's one of the main reasons why I always push back on games are as art or whatever. Like,
the fact that a grown man said that, like somebody who is past the age of fucking 6 years old actually stated this, and probably to some extent actually legitimately believe that, like, that is definitely probably one of the biggest arguments in the favor of just gassing the entire goddamn planet that I can think of. Like, we are past the point of redemption. We're past the point that any of this can be salvaged. These people should just be lined up and shot.
comedy podcast, by the way.
Yeah.
Don't ban me.
Subtle, exuberant personalities between voice acting inside a fucking dishwasher, yeah. You notice. His banners are purple and green.
Yeah.
He's got those Metzen colors going on there.
Feel and Void, or Fell, or whatever it's called.
Fell,
and then
Void.
The main logo. Like, that main logo that they've got on this article.
Yeah, it's just random lines.
You can't even read it. Like,
sound
you really
effects
have to focus on it.
usually off.
Usually off themselves. Yeah, it's just random like quotes from the article slapped on there, and then the celestial eruption shit. It just has like a weird noise filter in Photoshop.
And they're using the same fucking color as everything else for the drop shadow. Instead of making the text pop out, they've just kind of meshed it in to create this incomprehensible disaster.
Yeah. Probably,
what you would want to do is just copy the existing site's layout and use that for your logos and not...
This is actually a part of the script for the campaign. That's
yeah.
embarrassing.
Oh, shit. Campaign Creations has a Twitter, and they tweeted in 2010.
What makes a level fun, though? What makes a person want to play through that to actually find out what is happening to the characters? Well, shortly after creating the Phoenix, I knew I had made one too many melee maps.
Yeah, that destroyed me.
Edith had no melee missions in it whatsoever.
Untitled Phoenix did have some drastically different maps, aka probably fucking gimmicks in a couple places. The majority of it was melee. Like he's trying to like it comes off that he's trying to say that was negative.
Yeah, of course.
Like you're making an RTS in an RTS, and for some reason that's negative. Like it really, I'm only skimming this, but it doesn't seem like he really actually legitimately explains this. Like he's talking about like cutscenes and multiple objectives and garbage like this, but you don't need that. You don't need all this shit. You don't need cutscenes in the melee. You don't need multiple objectives. You don't need any of this shit. And then he goes into like level design and philosophy, place fun above all else. Well, what is fun? Pointing one button and walking around with 1 or 2 units, it's not fun. And I remember trying to play like fucking Flame Knives or something, and the game started after like 30 minutes of sitting around reading, and then the units just died to nothing and I had to reload. It's very fun, very engaging. And that's hailed as the fucking lead campaign for this game.
The best part is that in this case, the campaigns were never even finished. They were finished only via text. They were released as a novel or something. Like the actual story, like he released them as unfinished campaigns. Like the story basically ends after like 5 or 6 missions, and the rest of the story is available on his website as a novel.
Yep.
The
And
writing
he
in
thought
this
that
is so fucking bad. Holy shit.
he thought that was a good idea.
Well, he just figured, hey, people need to have an ending, so...
I have learned that it seems the people have the most fun when the campaign creator works the hardest, meaning the more you include and the less you rely on automated AI scripts, the more likely the player will see something unique in your map and want to play it through. Okay, first of all that English is wrong. So it's probably ESL. But automated AI scripts, that's well, that's a little contradictory, don't you see? Because you're making a fucking static element, which is software. It's automated. It's fucking pre-scripted no matter which way you fucking write it out. It's automated. You have triggers that happen for X, Y, Z. If it's a timer or someone doing something, that's automation. So he obviously doesn't even actually understand the fundamentals of how this stuff actually works at the conceptual level to begin with. But working the hardest is so fucking ambiguous. It's like he just wrote out all this text without actually really understanding or even caring about what any of it actually means. And not actually really thinking any of it through. Because, well, no shit people will want you to work the hardest in your project, but how the fuck is that a design philosophy? That doesn't fit. It doesn't fit at all. It's like, work hard and you'll succeed. It's like masturbate harder and you'll become a fucking ripped wrestling champion.
Same makes sense to me. Totally checks out.
And then, like... and then we go into terrain. And he says, only recently have I begun to take special notice of terrain. So first he says, earlier, that melee is bad. And then he says afterwards, only recently have I begun to take special notice of terrain. You can't make this shit up! This shit fucking writes itself.
Yeah, of course.
Holy shit.
Listen, if nobody has any fucking understanding. Nobody knows, dude. Nobody knows what the fuck is going on. Nobody understands melee. They just know that it's for whatever reason, in their twisted fucking brain, their wires get crossed, and they think that left-clicking some units and right-clicking some units for about maybe like 5 clicks per hour is actually more fun than actually playing a game. Maybe because they're bad at it. Maybe because they never wrote any custom AI in their fucking lives, so they just think that the only AI out there is Terran Campaign Insane. I don't know. I just know that they're wrong, and they must be excised from my fucking modding community. Okay? Gatekeeping. Do it.
He's literally saying he never made any attempt to actually understand Melee and then writes it off anyways.
Yeah.
He doesn't... Okay, this is a guy who had access to the most resources anybody would have at this point, Joel Studler, to make what could have been the most polished and high-quality project at the time, and then really set the precedent for other people to follow. But what really happens is he says, I don't understand this game. I've never played it before. I have no idea what's going on. I'm going to cite a bunch of shit I read in some fucking American game design document, and I'm going to pass it off as if I understand what I'm doing and what's going on, and that's going to be it. Because this like, he literally walks out and says, this had too much Melee gameplay, but I don't actually understand how the game works. But I made this judgment anyways, even though I'm making projects for a game based on this gameplay. I'm going to walk in and completely deviate from everything that was set forth by the original developers and the original players and the original community and the original investment, and every single person who will ever integrate or assimilate or experience my project. And I'm going to say, I know better, when I don't actually know anything at all, never actually made an attempt to know.
Yeah, it's like one thing to allege if you actually do know something that the rest of people don't, but there's no fucking proof, and your projects were garbage.
Like, he could just say, okay, I don't understand what I'm doing, and I wanted to make micro maps because I don't understand what I'm doing. But he just says, there's too many Melee maps, so I'm going to make something that's garbage, like objectively garbage, instead. Instead of figuring out, well, I didn't enjoy the Melee maps I made, so why didn't I enjoy them? How can I improve them? He just says he made too many, so he's literally implying that it was bad, that he had followed the original game design to begin with. Meanwhile, although this was early into StarCraft's lifespan, people would spend like half of their fucking lives professionally playing this. The same everything over and 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 over again. Tens of thousands of times. Like, he should have just dropped what he was doing and said, this is too much for me. I mean, I think that's what he did do. This was Dazzler, right? I'm pretty sure that's what he did do. Is that he realized that he doesn't understand what he's doing. Like, I think that was a turning point with Warcraft 3 when they made that demo thing. It was a disaster, and he realized I can't do this anymore. I mean, I'm not going to claim to know him or his decisions or whatever, but I think that a lot of these people realize that they just don't understand, and that they can't make a quick buck off of it, and that they can't get any fame off of it, and that maybe they understood, maybe they just didn't really understand ever. Like, that would be the hopeful thing, is that they came out of it a little more wise. But at the time, like, they're so completely unhinged. Their priorities are so fucking messed up. And, like, on one level, that's okay. Like, I can understand that. This is early into the game. This is like 1999, 2000, 2001. Like, the whole concept of making custom content really isn't that big at this point, especially for RTSs, especially for StarCraft. And you're going to have people that walk in that don't understand things, that don't know how to approach things, that don't know what to do when they run into something they didn't like or they felt that wasn't quality or whatever. They're not going to know what to do. So in many ways, you can kind of look at Dessler and be like, okay, you know, he probably grew from some manner from that. He moved on and maybe he learned a thing or two. You know, it was young. The game was young. The sort of meta, the environment was young. And mistakes are going to happen. I didn't make a lot of successful projects either at that point. I made total conversions and stuff like that, but, you know, I failed and learned and failed and learned, and I became what I am today through that process. But the thing is that this problem that we have here of this guy who makes a campaign and has Melee maps is of the original gameplay, and then arbitrarily decides, without any basis whatsoever, that he doesn't think that's good for some reason. So he goes and makes something completely unrelated. That's a mistake that's being repeated over and 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 over up to 20 fucking years later with StarCraft 2 and Warcraft 3, where literally none of these people even make the slightest hint of an effort of A, learning from the past, looking at past projects, looking at the past evolution. No.
Hello?
And hi.
Hi.
And like, these people continue to make that mistake today, where they're still making these fucking commando maps, these micro missions that have not evolved at all since their very first implementation by the very first generation of mappers for Brood War. They haven't learned anything at all. They haven't tried to learn anything at all. When I watched Antioch 3, it was the same depressing shit I have seen since I saw the first prototype maps for stuff in Brood War back on Battle.net in 1998. There's literally no difference. It's dressed up a little bit, and that's it. The actual interaction the player has with the game is the same because that's all you can fucking do. If you want more, you have to really go out of your way to do something like rip out the framework for Heroes of the Storm, reintegrate it into StarCraft 2, get all the skill shots and user element stuff in that, and then build an AI system around it, and then build a campaign around it. But none of these people have the balls to do that. They'll never do it. They'll never even try to do it. The closest you're going to get is Pirate and maps like Dwarven Combat, which, because of the limitations of StarCraft 2 and its online system, they'll never work in multiplayer anyways. You have to make it in a single player experience. But nobody thinks of it that way. They think, I'm going to make a campaign. You're going to play as a ghost. You can walk around and click a button to snipe people and walk around indicators that would reveal you. Like every other fucking game that's copy-pasted off of Metal Gear Solid and similar shit for years and years and years and years. We're going to try to pass it off as innovative. And we're going to be hailed as artists because we created art, because games are art. And there's no gatekeepers whatsoever. If there were gatekeepers, it wouldn't matter, because people who set the standards for things like having voice acting and having graphics, it didn't make a fuck of a difference for this particular games community, because nobody followed that afterwards. There were other people who made total conversions like Fungus Craft and Gundam Century, and as we go down the line, they have less and less features. They're less and less complete, until we reach the pinnacle of fuck with StarEdit.net in present day, where most people are too scared to even get into mods anyways, because they realize it would invalidate them. They would realize they would have to actually learn about what they're doing and how to actually make projects. And since they're too scared to actually figure out how to do stuff, they don't want to get into it. They sit there, stuck in the corner, as all the lessons and experiences and growing pains of people like Dessler are just all completely abandoned and forgotten about.
Well, that's the problem, is nobody's learning from the past. Nobody has any balls to fucking do anything, so Raynor slowly degenerates.
Yeah, well, I think this ties in with what we said before, with the lack of responsibility by the community to promote such projects. Like, I think this also comes down to a general lack of availability for critique. Like, there's not many people who actually offer critique. There's not many people who take it seriously either. Like, that's definitely.
And if they do, they get berated for it by fanboys.
Yeah.
So then they feel like they don't want to share anything at all.
Yeah.
So then they don't.
Really,
so then it just creates an echo chamber.
Exactly. It really invalidates a lot of otherwise perfectly reasonable points.
Well, yeah, that was one thing that I experienced that I never thought would ever happen, is people were coming into my YouTube channel or my Discord server or wherever they were contacting me, and they were saying, can you make this easier? Like, huh? And of course, there's people who are like, you know, they prefer micromaps or whatever because they're just degenerates, but the idea that you would go to somebody else and make requests, or in more extreme cases demands, of a custom content developer, like Hoopthor and a few other people have given examples of their own trials and tribulations with that, but I don't know, it seems really strange that you would have shit like that in it's an RTS game. You're making RTS
you actually
content.
Have people come to your Discord server asking you to asking you why you criticize the Warcraft 3 campaign. Like, that actually happened as well.
Yeah, that does happen. Still to this day. You get people who are like, why don't you like Warcraft 3? Question mark. Gee. Couldn't imagine.
Custom content is like, it's a very simple thing. You know, the concept is really simple. People who walk into custom content, they do it because they want to make something that is either like a pet project, like they have a story they want to tell or whatever, or they got an idea for gameplay or something, and they're deriving it off of something. That even comes down to most games today. They're just mods. Like most people who use pre-built engines like Unity or Unreal or whatever, they're just modders. They're not really game designers because they're not actually getting into the actual part of making games that's actually difficult, which is the engine and everything related. They're just cobbling together middleware and calling themselves game designers because it's hip and trendy. But with mods, it's like, well, I make something for myself because I wanted to get into this. I'm going to pick up the tools. I'm going to learn things and make something I enjoy because that's a concept. It's not in practice for most things today, especially with trash communities like Skyrim. But that's the concept, right? Like, you guys probably got into modding because you wanted to make something you enjoyed for some extent. Yeah. So why would then the question might be, well, why would that change when we go to the distribution aspect? Because the distribution aspect changes things. It's about you're creating something for somebody else, and it's not free because people have to spend time to get into something. People have to spend time to get into something. And there's an obligation as a designer, even if you're making something just for yourself, that if you want other people to play and engage your project, you have an obligation to present something to them that even if they don't necessarily enjoy it, even if it's a game type they're not necessarily going to enjoy or whatever, that it's something that's still worth their time. It's still something that represents your efforts in a positive manner. You may not necessarily be very good at what you're doing. You may not necessarily be very skilled. And your project may not necessarily represent the evolution of the game at its state. But it's still something that if you put it on the internet for other people to experience, you're obligated to at least do the bare minimum that they don't feel like they have just run their nutsack across a cheese grater by playing it. But then you turn around 360 degrees, walk away, go to Nexus, go to Skyrim Nexus, where half of these major projects, you're first greeted with Patreon logos and PayPal logos and people begging for endorsements and donations and shit. And then you get some really, really ugly fucking stock logos they've slapped onto here and there. And then when you actually finally go through the process of downloading and installing this project, you're met with something that is blatantly untested and completely fucked. And then you start to ask a lot of different questions. Like, how did modding turn from something where it was people making pet projects that they enjoyed and maybe sharing them with their friends to people begging for validation from other people? Because that's what it became. And that's because there's no gatekeeping. That's because there's no standards. That's because not a single person with any degree of power at Nexus sat down and thought, maybe we shouldn't make this a platform for people to pander for attention. Maybe we should make this a platform for people to push for quality. They didn't do that, though. So you have likes and endorsements and all this other shit, which, completely disrupts the flow of people being able to push content. If you make a new project, most people are going to be stuck on the defaults of listing things by endorsements. Your new project, no matter how good it is, no matter how many tens of thousands of hours you've spent masturbating to orcs on, it's not going to be listed at the front because it's being listed by endorsements. All these projects from 10 fucking years ago that don't even work anymore are going to be hogging all the traffic. Except for people who are specifically looking for released by time. So what you end up with is a lot of circle jerks where people look to they see endorsements and likes as the measure by how successful they were. And this is an observation I've seen in StarCraft 2 as well. There was, I actually have an article of it on my site where some guy was basically, he wanted to use the review process to berate people, but then was like, oh, other people can jump in and provide details. He didn't actually want to provide any actual meat to any review. He just wanted to use a review as a process to badge people. And then if people like things, they can just leave a like. he said, word for word. He'd rather people just give him a number to validate him rather than actually engage him as a designer.
That's
So
like the
there's a lot
opposite of what designers actually want, though. Like, what the fuck?
Yeah. Like, if you actually want to design something, you really want to know, first of all, what's busted that you've missed. Because if something is supposed to work that you've spent however much time working on, and if it doesn't work, you want to know the hows and the whys so you can fix it. You're not going to catch everything in a large project, even a small project, depending on the platform. You're not going to catch everything. So it always helps to have feedback to say, hey, I encountered this or that. But now, because of shit like YouTube and Reddit and everything else, which is filled with this echo chambery cancel culture, feels good, kumbaya, pearl clutching shits, you have people that just like or dislike. And that doesn't actually tell you anything. A dislike could be anything. It could be they hated the color of your testicles. They hated your face. They hated your ethnicity. They hated the fact that you voted Trump. They just trolled you. There's downvote fairies, as they're called. They just downvote just for the fuck of it because it's a button, push it. In the same sense, a like doesn't tell you anything. It doesn't tell you what they liked. It doesn't say they liked your presentation, they liked your story, they liked your narrative, they liked your tutorial, they liked one specific part they engaged, but they haven't engaged the rest of it. It tells you nothing. There's no engagement. But whenever you push these buttons, it gives you that psychological feels good that you contributed to something. You engaged something, but you didn't have to get in this scary world of actually putting your hands on the fucking typewriter and typing out any kind of actual response. You get to sort of like tiptoe in and touch a button and, feel good to yourself that you quote unquote contributed without actually engaging, because engagement is scary. Engaging people is very, very scary. Socializing is very, very scary. So they don't do it. They don't do it. So you get the upvotes and the downvotes and all this other shit. And StarCrafts and Dwarven Combat, the two biggest StarCraft 2 projects that I helped, both content creators completely engulfed in this turmoil about posts on Reddit when they released their projects and their upvotes and their views.
The StarCraft Reddit is fucking empty anyway. What are they concerned about? Nobody goes there anyway.
Pirate actually had a lot of problems where his threads would get a lot of upvotes and then they'd get deleted. As far as I understood it at the time, is that if your thread got enough upvotes, it was pushed to other parts of Reddit. And when this happened, other people just straight up deleted his thread. So he was really concerned about that, as opposed to concerned about what people actually thought about his map. Like, when these projects were like a week or two from release, the people managing them were just completely engulfed in the aspect of how they were going to handle this social media thing and their likes and their updates and shit like that, rather than actually about the project. So lo and behold, both projects get released. You never hear anything about them ever again. There's no post support. StarCraft was supposed to have a lot of post support, and it never happened. So things just remain broken, just untouched. And it's because what they wanted, or they didn't get what they wanted. They got their money, their attention, their validation for their 15 minutes, and then that was it. That's why they made the projects. That's why they went through however many months or whatever of planning and labor and whatever, is just for that momentary, thread on Reddit that had a couple hundred hits on it or a couple thousand hits on it, and that was it. That's all they cared about. That's all they cared about. Like that. It's hard for me to even understand how you even get into that mindset, because it just makes no fucking sense to me at all. I would think that in StarCraft's case, it's Carbot. He's an animator. He's actually very, very technologically inept. He doesn't understand anything about computers whatsoever or legalese whatsoever. But maybe he's just an animator. He just knows Flash. He's making something he wants to enjoy, and let's turn it into a mod because that's a neat idea. But he was very disconnected from the whole process. Very, very disconnected from the whole process. And the other people that were really involved with it, the guy doing the data, I never really talked to him too much, so I can't really say I understand him too well, but the guy managing it, they just immediately just moved on, just gone. And I mean, in many cases, when you release a project and you don't have post support, you can only really just move on, right? But it's more like there's no like actual engagements or anything going on. It just disappears. It just happens and then vanishes. You go through years to months of work for a poof and then gone. And then I always ask, well, what's the fucking point? Like, what was the fucking point?
Oh, I have no idea.
Campaign, right?
I couldn't tell you.
This is a total conversion, and their longevity is supposed to be a lot more, right? Like I saw you guys posting about a Red Alert mod.
Yeah.
And some of those videos have thousands of views on them, and I honestly find that really surprising. That a project for Red Alert of all things has that much traffic on a random video for it. Like that tells you that there's a lot of longevity and a lot of traffic still surrounding that, and I personally find that really surprising. Because I didn't know the communities for those games were big enough to support that kind of traffic. Like that's honestly really astonishing. But they do. And you know what? It's a melee mod. It's a total conversion, right? Like that. This is what StarCraft and stuff never sees. And then the people who put in probably as much or more effort to make things like StarCraft's. I know that HKS and I put in a lot of effort. A lot of effort in redoing everything and all the technical art and integration and stuff like that, and then testing as well. HKS ultimately a lot more so. And none of that translated to us. Like most people don't even know that we had anything to do with it because we weren't credited until very, very recently, actually. I believe we may have been credited somewhere. I don't know where. Somewhere when the StarCraft 1 version came out. I think there's like a special thanks or something with our names in it. But, most people don't even know that StarCraft even exists. Like people who play StarCraft 2. And this was featured on the launcher. It wasn't just a Reddit post. It was featured on a launcher, but it had no longevity whatsoever. So the whole gamble that they had to create this project based on being, famous and making a splash, it was a lost gamble. I mean, yes, they got a lot of money off a scam starter, and that's ultimately what really matters. But like as far as like their impact on the game, it was entirely non-existent. And then it didn't have any longevity as an actual project either, right? So, like, I mean, this kind of brings us back to when we started when we were talking about money and people throwing money at this, like Oracle. And maybe it's just because I'm old-fashioned and because I don't have money to throw around. But I find the whole prospect of throwing money to skip through barriers to completing something being really silly. Because to me, building projects is a learning experience. And like when I hear you guys talking about like Doom and stuff, that actually kind of interests me. Because I find the whole like rendering process that these old shooters have very interesting. And I've only like recently heard about a lot of this stuff because of the fact that I've been well, I can't say recently because it's been a while since I've done regular recording, but because I was recording shooters and I mentioned them, and somebody else who's a lot more knowledgeable than me, who's a professional programmer, was telling me about some of the rendering and stuff that they do for these old shooters, and they're not like real 3D, but they look like 3D, and some really weird bugs happen because they did X or Y. There's like a Brazilian rip of Duke Nukem or Doom or something that's using one of the other's engine, and there's a lot of weird bugs with that.
Well, I can tell you a lot about that if you're interested someday.
Yeah, like that kind of stuff like interests me. And like to me it's like very academic. Like if I wanted to get into something, it'd because I want to make a project and I wouldn't even think about releasing it unless like I had finished it. But it's like let's say I had $90,000 to throw around like StarCraft Universe or Oracle or any of these other people that for some reason StarCraft 2 attracted these people and attracted the money. It's not just I asked for $90,000, these people actually gave them $90,000 as well. Like that. People gave someone money to make a map in StarCraft 2. It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make, like, from a designer perspective, it doesn't make any sense either. Like, okay, some stuff costs money. Like, if you want to actually legitimately own your software, I own Substance Designer and I own, Mintext and stuff like that. That's expensive. And that came from donations. Like the Substance Designer was donated, but still, it's like $150, $200 or something like that for the Steam version I've got. That's a lot of money, and not everybody can afford that. But modding has always been hand in hand with piracy, anyways, and nobody is ever going to fault you for having a ho-hum version of 3ds Max lying around from 2010 that you used to create a StarCraft project. Nobody's going to give a shit. And that's always been hand in hand with modding, because nobody could afford $10,000 licenses for these programs, which is why the subscription thing is insane. Again, because it if you want to get into mods and stuff like that, it's non-profit by design. You can't afford to throw however many thousands of dollars at licenses for this stuff. And not everybody can have access to a student license either. But beside the point, like monetary investment is usually about like setting up your environment and your tools. Like you got to have a computer. You gotta have maybe a tablet for drawing stuff. You gotta have maybe the modeling software, whatever. But people see money as a means to an end to skip the process of making stuff, like Oracle, for example. Now, again, I'm not going to claim to know these people, but to me, it just seemed like he didn't actually want to make a project. I mean, we've already concluded that, right? But like, just from the very get-go of how you laid it out before you even get into it, is I'm going to have this guy make graphics. I'm going to have this guy implement them. I'm going to buy my voice acting. I'm going to buy my music and all this other stuff. And then it comes down to I'm going to have, maybe this guy make my maps or do whatever. And then you start asking, what the fuck are you doing yourself? We get into the same problem. Like, again, back with mods. The idea of making a mod is you're making something for yourself, right? Or maybe for your friends. Like D&D is a lot like that too. You make a game in which you design it for your group of friends or group of associates, whatever, you guys have fun together or whatever. 99% of people who play your project, you're never going to talk to them anyways. So it doesn't really matter. But now you start going into the process, you're not even involved in actually creating your project anymore. So like, you get a lot of really different questions about why. And then you look at the end result. Like, as a consumer, you wouldn't really give a fuck what they're thinking or doing, as long as you get the end result that's good. But the end result is just as schizophrenic as the actual process that went into making it. Like, we look at the assets that Oracle showed for Legacy of the Confederation thus far. This is random free shit you can download off of fucking anywhere on the internet. You can go to random Russian websites and download stuff that's way better looking than this. But he actually paid for it. So it wasn't just like, I have money and I'm going to make the highest quality project I can with it. It's more like, I have money, I'm just going to throw it at the earliest fucking convenience. And anyone who says they can do it, regardless of their actual qualifications. And he's so disassociated with it to the point that the end result is not even worth money to begin with. He's literally just pissing money into a fucking void. Why? Like, what? Why? Does anyone know why this keeps happening?
Oh, I think it's just a furthering of the incompetence. It's got to just be him being incompetent with spending his money, just like he was incompetent when he was actually in charge of designing stuff in the first place. You can't imagine that he just changes out of nowhere.
I don't think that's really the problem. I think it's more a problem of intent. The intent that he has is not that of making a game.
No, yeah, I mean, if he intended to do something with his money that was intelligible, that would lead to a high-quality end result, he would get more involved and he would become more competent by nature, but he won't. And yeah, like, I guess, you could intend to improve in that sense. But I don't think that, I think it's just, he's incompetent and he never wanted to be anything but incompetent. So, I don't necessarily know that he wants to be incompetent, but he certainly doesn't want it enough to change that reality, you know what I mean?
Yeah, he doesn't want to make a game. I think that's really the key issue here. They don't want to make games.
Yeah.
They don't want to make productions.
Listen, I just hope he's got plenty of other money lying around so that he can throw it at somebody else.
I mean, I think he owned an iPhone, so he must be filthy, filthy rich.
True.
Like, why did it's so easy to say, oh, people are incompetent. They're just diving into games because it's the meme and games are a fad. You can be an epic game developer and make epic money and release epic loot boxes and be successful and shit like that. But okay, StarCraft 2 is not the best medium to be flexing your money in because you're never going to get anything out of it anyways. Nobody plays StarCraft 2. So, why go into something like a mod or a map or a campaign and do it there when you can even just grab the same useless talent you already have and just throw it at Unreal? and get an actual game out of it, and then make more money. Maybe you can eventually create Fortnite or Minecraft or some other fucking bargain bin mobile game, and then you don't have to actually work anymore. You never have to suck dick on the street anymore. You don't need to push papers anymore. You just sit there and just rake in money inside your fortress of candy like Notch. Like, but they don't do that. They don't do that. So it's like the mindset always, like, at superficially it seems really simple. When you actually get into it, it's just like full on delusion, dementia. And that's why gatekeeping is important. Gatekeeping in a sense that, you know, you want to have standards. Like, I speak of gatekeeping more or less from a personal sense. Because with stuff like the Blizzard community, it's never going to be gatekeeping because there's no community. So you can't gatekeep something that doesn't exist. But from a personal sense, having standards is important. Holding people to standards is important. But when you look at these deconstructed, disassociated, decentralized, you know, a sort of beehive of just insanity that is, you know, Blizzard's community, you can't really impose that on other people because they're always going to resist it because they've been grown up to believe absurdities like games are art and all expression is equal. Literally to the point that they think being a fucking, you know, student in a music class or something allows you to actually have a real world opinion on such a thing when it's completely unrelated. Not to mention they're not even musicians to begin with. And like it's rare to run into this from where I'm from, but in Antioch 3 I did run into this. And I was met with a realization that people are actually just like beyond forgiveness. Like they just are lost. And you can't really like engage these people anymore. Like it's reached a point where you just can't engage them anymore. Like you can't explain to them anything. You can't explain like, okay, so this should be improved because X or Y. You can't explain that this should be revised because it doesn't make sense. Because logic no longer works. Logic no longer functions. And that's why I think smaller groups are very important. Because smaller groups of people tend to congregate because they share some kind of value, some kind of pursuit. But also, you have to lead by example. Leading by example is the single most powerful point of gatekeeping, period. Is if you have a focus point, a centerpiece that you yourself are representing by releasing your own content or presenting your own content or even just reviewing content, whatever it is, that you yourself are the epicenter and you don't overextend that presence. So say, for example, you have a website that releases campaigns for a game. Let's say like Campaign Creations. And Campaign Creations has some campaigns by Dessler and RCX and maybe Hitler. And they're whatever quality. You know, or whatever. But these are the people who run the website, right? These are the people who run the website. So if somebody else wants to come up to these group of people and say, hey, I've got a campaign, can I have it posted here? The group of people would say, well, our site's based on our content, and our content has reached so-and-so standard. So let's check out what you've got and see if it meets that standard. And if it does, they post on the website. If it doesn't, then they don't post it. But you notice the difference between that and every other modern website, like say, for example, Stardate.net or SE2 Mapster or, you know, Nexus or whatever. The people that run the websites are either conglomerates that have no association to games whatsoever, especially in the case of Nexus, or they're people like Curse, another conglomerate, but people who don't actually have anything to do with content creation whatsoever. Like Stardate.net. Nobody in actual control of Stardate.net actually does anything or has done anything or probably ever did anything for years and years and years and years. They hold on to it with an iron grip because they just want to have it. They don't actually do anything. So in order to set a standard for quality, you have to, first of all, engage people who are submitting content, which nobody's doing on any of these websites whatsoever. Most of them, you can just upload stuff that's not even verified, as is the case with Nexus. People can just upload whatever the fuck. So there's no gatekeeping in the sense that there's no one setting a pace. There's no one feeling inclined to meet someone setting a pace. So it's just complete chaos. And sometimes that can be beneficial, like hunting for resources. If you're looking for resources, like for example, you want to see how someone did something or something like that, it helps to have access to assets and stuff. But there's no segregation between little Timmy's Vormod and Tom's Tolkien version of horsecocks on everything in the entire planet, besides endorsements, which are not even like objective or subjective. They're just noise. They're just an obstacle to users finding content because they fuck with the search results and medium by which users engage content. They're this third-party thing that just really shouldn't even exist because they can't be measured by anything actually objective. So they're just another noise that separates gatekeeping entirely. So when you look at things like gatekeeping, you have to think of it as a difference between the experience of the user trying to engage content and that content being presented and represented in a respectable manner, like a campaign of a certain degree of quality, or a learning resource. But that is never, like that, even that, I don't think that distinction exists anywhere. I've never seen it anywhere. I have never seen a site dedicated to modding that hosted learning resources, except for the occasional article and guide that was, or a fucking wiki. The worst is wikis. Absolute worst is a wiki. Wikis are not learning material. They're not. And then maybe you have the occasional guy who makes YouTube videos because that's great. And then that's it. And that's not gatekeeped at all. That's not verified at all. Like Unreal, again, Unreal is the problem with this. A lot of the learning material for Unreal is so out of date that it can't be applied to the engine anymore. Like, things have just changed too much and all the context is different. And some things just have even been entirely deprecated. It just doesn't exist anymore. And this is the biggest engine and the most important middleware on the market for games today. And not even games. It's going into film and simulation and VR and ArcViz and stuff like that. And the learning material for it is that big of a mess and that incomplete. Their own wiki, their own resources, I think it's been shut down for months to years now, awaiting some kind of indefinite updates. So like it's not just modders that have problems with stuff like this. It's like, and again, this is why I said communities are stupid. Because communities, like if you want a community, it obligates you to have gatekeeping and standards and segregation and stuff like that. Because that's sort of like the context of communal interaction is the improvement of everybody involved, right?
Yeah, like why else would you be bothering with a community if you're not there to learn from the previous releases of that community, be brought up to the standard accepted by that community, be able to, like, empowered to and educated to surpass that standard and help set a new one. Like that's probably the reason why you should be producing content at all, is to try to work on your own standards, your own process, and improve it sort of in a segmented nature. But when you stack on the fact that nobody, I guess independently, you'll find very few people will come to that realization and actually try to do that. But even when you combine that with communities which already have their own echo chambers and are rarely based in any degree of qualitative standard, you're almost never going to see that happen in custom content. Just because, for one, it's just completely rare on an individual human level. And for another, like, it's never going to be promoted by any of these communities that we've been exposed to. Besides maybe like what Dynamo was talking about earlier with the Doom communities, where they're splintered in a couple of different ways, but it's still thought that, there's certain like tenets that are sort of universally agreed upon, and projects that stray from them.
Actually, a big part of it as well. Like there's plenty of that to come around.
Right, and projects that stray from the standards shared by all of these Doom communities are almost universally reviled, from what you've told us as well. So it seems like that would be a good standard as for communities to hold themselves to, but they'll never do that. And I think too many people have mixed the whole friendship thing with the communal improvement thing, and they've tried to like cross the beams, cross the streams, and it has not worked out very well for the end user of any of these custom projects. I wouldn't argue that it's worked out well for the producers of these projects themselves, besides whoever got lucky enough to land a job at Blizzard for some weird reason, or whatever, who made like some industry connections. Beyond that shit, like
I would not call that luck.
Well, they'll be able to put well, I was gonna say they'll be able to put food on the table, but I guess that's not even true anymore, is it? So yeah, you're right. I wouldn't call that luck either now that I think about it. But yeah, I mean, besides making some occasional connections for the industry, like I just don't get it. Like, I don't understand why you would join a community if your intent isn't to improve in the first place, and that community isn't going to provide you with the opportunity or the resources required to educate yourself so that you can improve. So it comes down to, like, in a perfect storm, both of those two groups, the community and the individual, would be aligned in their interests and their motivations, and the objectives would match up. And it can be dysfunctional if you get a community that doesn't completely align with that, or you get an individual who tries to join the community, but they have some clash there. That's more common. But with StarCraft and Warcraft 3 and StarCraft 2, neither of these two positions are being fulfilled correctly. Nobody's doing their fucking job. Nobody's actually trying to improve on an individual level beyond, like, the very simple stuff that you improve upon just by doing stuff occasionally every weekend. And nobody is, like, collating resources on the communal side so that people can actually do stuff beyond some dysfunctional wikis now and then. And they can be useful for references, but they're not going to educate people from top to bottom. So I don't know. It's not something that can be solved.
The biggest downfall of StarCraft's community, I probably brought this up before, but it was people who wanted to be admins of websites without actually engaging now.
Right, yeah.
So, like Dessler. Okay, the campaigns he made were questionable, and some of the interview stuff is questionable, but he was the lead of his site, and he set the pace. And then whatever happened, and then he was no longer there. And then the site started trading hands all over the place, the vast majority of which never actually did anything, up to present day. And this was the case for a lot of StarCraft's websites, like Star Alliance and Magic. And all the staff and stuff like that just didn't do anything. They weren't invested in projects. And you had people like Zaran who did all they could to just fuck with things instead of actually do stuff.
Can you believe that guy is a character in Flame Knives or whatever?
He thought Metzen was a good guy. Let's just leave it at that. He was a 16-year-old with hopes and dreams to become edged.
Well,
and but like all these websites all had the same problem, but there was so many of those websites, so there was always like these talks about mergers because it's all fractured, But unlike the Doom community, which had people actually producing projects, none of these sites had people producing projects. I think around 2004, which was the height of my production, there was maybe one other person who dabbled in StarCraft anymore. Period. Maybe Korea had one or two active people back then, but we never heard of them. So War of the Magi was the only Korean project I was aware of around that era. And but they were completely separated from us anyways. So, but people didn't want to merge websites and put all their assets together for the betterment of end users because they couldn't agree over who would be administrative over this, who would actually like retain power. So all these people would just bicker with each other and then refuse to actually cooperate with each other because they could never come to any agreement about who was actually going to be in charge of anything, aka who was given the forum tag of administrator to lord over the 5 or 6 people that still lurked there. And again, like it brings us right back. People just weren't interested in actually making projects. And that is the key ingredient necessary to have a successful website and a successful community surrounding that website. Even if the website is as simple as a blog or a wiki or something like that, you have to have people actually like that are in charge, that are actually working on stuff and setting the pace and setting the standard. Because then people, what I have found with casting and stuff like that is that I've had actually a lot of people over the years come to me about StarCraft projects. And these StarCraft projects will probably never make it to the public eye in any shape or fashion. And these people would come to me and ask for my opinion or my feedback on what they were doing because of the stuff I had shown on YouTube way back. And then I would say, this or that, you could fix this, you could fix that, and they would improve it, and we'd go back and forth. And the improvements would actually be quite significant. And some of the custom assets I've seen come out of people have been very significant. And that is a community. Like, I mean, it's just an exchange between me and another people, but that has formed that interaction already. I've already served as a gatekeeper for these people because now they're trying to meet my standards because of something I said or did years and years and years ago that I brought to the forefront. But these people are interested in making projects and setting the standard for themselves and improving. So they've reached out to me and engaged me willfully over that, even though a lot of more modern, like immature people from StarCraft 2 would, just puke if they had to even attempt to meet any kind of standards. And these weren't like old people. Like a lot of these people are even young, like way younger than me, like 10 years younger than me. And they still, like, because they were working for themselves, they still wanted to improve their graphics. They still wanted to work on AI. They wanted to learn things about AI and stuff like that. And I would give them what I had, which wasn't really much at the time, but I'd help them, with their graphics, especially like pointing out like shadows and stuff like that was a really big one, and particle effects. And I tell them about my pipeline and I give them what our tools and resources I had, and then results would come from it, and then they were content with that, and that was good. And that's the interaction you would kind of expect. Like that's the interaction that I expected.
Yeah.
And I think that even like asking for more than that is a slippery slope. Like, let's say, for example, we were to make a website and it would have, whatever projects on it. And you would enable people to submit projects. Like that already is a point that I don't cross. Like my content, for example. I have an individual who would like to one day cross-post some articles. But the articles, since English is a second language, the articles are not quite as polished in some respects. So we were going to post them actually like a year ago, but then it didn't come up. It didn't, like, he said not to post them because they didn't quite meet the quality standards. And it's like the only content I would ever consider like cross-posting and stuff like that. Or, for example, certain recordings for certain videos. There was that extra video for the Dragon's Dogma Extreme edition recording the compilation that I casted over, and other cast overs that go into the other section, like the R-Type, Gorbrun, and stuff like that. Those go through a lot of passes to make it to release. And they always go through me. Like it's always something that goes through me that I verify. You need to have that personal level of engagement. Otherwise, gatekeeping doesn't work. That's why map protection and stuff like that doesn't work. Because you are hurting people who could actually positively benefit, and people who want stuff from your project to steal it, they're going to get it. They're going to get it. Reverse engineering this stuff is not difficult. You can pull stuff out of anything. If somebody really wants to get into your project and steal stuff from it, they're going to get it. You're not going to stop them. Like with StarCraft 2 is probably like the greatest poster child. Oh, you can play maps on Balnet, but you don't download them locally. Oh, yes, you do. They're in your user folder. Just open them in the editor. Okay. We'll delete the GUI triggers. That'll stop those thieves. Oh, wait, we can just use the galaxy anyways, which we already understand because we're reverse engineering other people's projects. So you literally don't do anything besides create a very slight inconvenience. Map protection doesn't work. It just doesn't work. And that's not a form of gatekeeping. That's just a form of denial. That's like believing that you have created something so special, that your RTS that's now an RPG is so epic and special that now it has to be protected from those hundreds of thousands of thieves that are going to steal your map, make a duplicate, and host it on Balnet and get tens of thousands of your players that you're never going to meet. The conversations I had with people at start@.net about those subjects really enlightened me as to how sheltered that community is. These people, like, they don't want to get into mods, right? They're scared of learning new stuff.
Yeah.
But they also, many of them firmly believe in map protection as well. So, like, they don't want to learn anything and they don't want other people to learn anything. But they, at the same time, they think super highly of their maps, despite the fact they're just maps for a game that doesn't really have any.
And that is actually one area where the Doom community again shines, in that map protection is absolutely frowned upon in all Doom communities. No single Doom mod has it. Every time anyone has tried it, they were pretty much trolled out of the community. which is what you would expect, but sadly not what happens.
I get the impression that Doom is a very European community. Is that true?
Not really. Most of the... Well, it's kind of split, I guess. There's not really any central ethnicity. There's a lot of Americans, a lot of Europeans, and lately some Koreans and Japanese, but it's definitely mostly a Western community.
Because I have noticed across all these communities that the culture is super different for like Russia and Europe over Americans. Like, take for example Warcraft 3. There is a huge amount of communities and forums and these small groups and stuff from like Italy and Russia and stuff where they just freely distribute whatever the fuck.
Yeah.
And unprotecting stuff for other people to get into, like Dota, for example, and all this other shit. And they have all these tools and stuff, and their tools tend to be really well developed. And they tend to be way more open and way more laid back and usually way more friendly as well. And that's something I have seen like all the way into independent games. I've had Babylon 5 independent games contact me, and I dealt with them for a while, and they were Russian. And I've dealt with a lot of Russian mappers in Warcraft 3 and stuff like that. And like the people and the culture and the stuff that I had like that tends to be really, really much more open and usually much more easy to get into despite the language barriers.
Yeah, there's also a lot of Russians as well. And there definitely is the mentality that it's better to teach a man how to fish rather than to give him a fish, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
There's definitely a lot of guides and a lot of critique guys as well. Like, there was someone who wrote an article talking about one of the most hyped projects, which is called Knee Deep in Zidum, which is a very old project by this point. It was hyped to hell, and then when it actually came out, some people loved it because of the hype, but other people were like, this is not very well built. And they actually wrote a guide about it, explaining how many of the things in that mod were done wrong. Like, many of the lighting effects were fucked, many of the detailing aspects were really poorly executed. And that is not something I have really seen elsewhere in modding communities. Like, again, it is what you would expect to see everywhere, because every single modding community shares the same premise, where you get overhyped projects that really are not made by people who are capable. I guess you could call it the Madsen effect, whereas people are convinced that these developers are way better than they really are. And like in Doom, at least there's some areas where you can offer critique and where you can read about it from people who have a lot of experience. But sadly, that doesn't seem to be the case for StarCraft 1, for example. Like, I'm not an expert, so I don't know if that is indeed the case, but that's the impression I got anyway.
That is the case, yeah.
I mean, I'm pretty much the only person who does actual critique for Brood War stuff, and it's not because like it's exceptionally difficult to do. I have a lot of history with the game, but so what? Like, so do half of the people that are still there. Yeah, and so I don't know. It's not. It's definitely weird that like nobody's got like people have guides for like technical things like how to set up forces or how to run triggers and how to use locations. But nobody really has any qualitative standard guides. Like, nothing is about, like, here's how you design a level to not be really annoying to play. Or here's how you can get into a mindset that will help you produce high-quality content in this engine. There's nothing really like that. You get, like, a couple of my videos are like that, but even, like, my stuff is woefully ill-equipped. Like, if you were to look at it, would give you a starting point maybe, or it would help you clue into my mindset in particular, but it's not a written thing. It's just video stuff. It's like, might as well just be an audio thing, right? It's like a podcast, like me just talking about stuff. And so that's pretty much the most you'll get outside of like directly talking with people who are in the scene, like me and iQuare and people who've made content for it, and not just fucking like Life of a Marine shit. But I don't know, man. It doesn't seem to follow in my head that we would get so many people who have opened up some modding tool or another, some map editor or another, and still we've gotten nothing. We've not gotten anything. Like, I don't want to be the only person making high quality content in this fucking game. Like, I don't view that as an accomplishment. That's a sad state of affairs. And so I just don't understand why, for one, nobody... I mean, it just goes back to the community argument that we talked about. Like, just nobody's bothering to do any gatekeeping, and nobody's bothering to actually try to make this community work. Any community work. Now you got started at Dynamo, protecting maps, and their argument has morphed so much because, like, you can tell just looking at the quote unquote advancements where EUDs came out in like obviously EUDs were always possible in 161 and to a much more aggressive extent back then, but Remastered authorized a couple of them, and now people are like, oh, we can use EUDs officially, so now those are okay to do. And like before, they were like staunchly against them because they weren't like officially sanctioned or whatever the fuck. Like they weren't quote unquote possible. Like at this point, like these people are like, yeah, you got to. I'm a purist, so I only like stuff that you can make in the editor. And I'm like, oh, you must be talking about Star Edit, which you can't even use anymore. So all right, good job. But like no, they're like, no, you could use SCM draft. And like, oh, you must not be talking about EUDs. And they're like, oh, you could use EUDs now. They're officially sanctioned. That's fine. And so is SCM draft. SCM draft is the only editor now. So of course it's fine to use that. And like, not only that, but then they go to the point where some people who are saying this shit are actually using a third-party program so that they can track like bank data, basically, because they're too scared to fucking mod. But they still want bank data, so they're going to use a third-party program that runs. Like, you might as well just be fucking collecting Bitcoin with that. Like, you don't know what's going on with that program. At least with a mod, it's only going to be running code. It's like for the game itself. You have a pretty reasonable assumption that nobody's bothered to put in a Bitcoin miner in your mod. It's never unprecedented, never happened before. Whereas like just running random software from Russian sites probably isn't the best idea. So just watching the goalposts shift consistently every year or so is pretty entertaining, but also pretty fucking depressing when you realize that they're never getting any closer to saying, yeah, modding is probably the way to go. And it's not even like an ego thing with me. Like, I just want good content. I've never played a good map that's just a map. I don't care how many EUDs or how many fucking third-party programs you run alongside it. I've never played anything that feels like an actual game, unless it's an RTS map, in which case it's usually annoying to play because nobody does any modded AI without a fucking mod, obviously. And so at that point, I'm just playing some weird melee game with Campaign Insane running. Like, who gives a fuck? Like, we've played this so many times at this point. Like, it's not content, and even if it was the first time I was playing it, it wouldn't be content. And so, like, yeah, there's nothing. There's no value being created now that is part of an organized, like, community with a website. There's nothing like that. So, like, even my Discord server isn't really collectively about that. It's more just a hangout with people who like the content that I make on YouTube and the content that I make in Brood War, but it's not really anything to hoot about either. Like, people here make all sorts of varying quality projects, and it's more like a hobbyist thing. But definitely what we lack in the Blizzard world is a community that's designed to act like a community should for custom content. Like, a custom content community should be looking to improve upon the lessons of and the offerings of yesteryear, and yet things are just getting worse. So
I don't think Blizzard can ever foster a community like that, because the kind of people that they attract to their player base are people who are mentally damaged.
Yeah,
yep.
That is unfortunately true.
Well, especially now, there's no going back. I mean,
yeah, after Warcraft 3, it's all gone to hell.
Fell. Well, we're bordering on 2.5 hours now, so figure we can wrap things up here. Were there any final points or anything that you guys feel like we didn't quite cover in full? Any final takeaways?
Nothing I can really think of. I think we touched upon most of the more important topics related to the subject. I can't really think of anything else, but
yeah, unfortunately, it's mostly a depressing episode. There's not any unless you're starting a budding community for a game that either has had communities before, or like you're trying to revive it, or it's a new game, which none of them are moddable anyway, so it's like a pure hypothetical. unless you're in those situations, like then you can at least learn from the failings of these communities, and maybe that's been useful. But there's pretty much no way you can sort of just use this to contextualize your experience with your own custom content communities that you've been a part of or you've heard about, and maybe it'll help you out there. But as far as the end user goes, when they're listening to this podcast, it's mostly just a history lesson and an argument for abortion.
Yeah.
And me getting angry.
Yeah. Me too, though.
Like I said, fuck communities. Like, I don't want to have anything to do with communities anymore. I stay away from them. I don't, like, try to create them or anything like that, because I have realized it's a really, really slippery slope as a content developer to really, like, get involved in that kind of stuff. And, you know, for me, it's just like, I just want to, like, create videos or, you know, sometimes other pet projects. And then if I release them, I release them. But it's definitely something that, like, you should, like, if you're actually, like, invested in making custom content, you shouldn't even be thinking about the community. You should just be making your shit and only worrying about making your shit and being as, like, detached from other people as possible.
Yeah, I think that's probably the best thing is you can find your learning materials with enough searching and enough, you know, you can find your fucking assets with enough rushing, but you're probably not going to be able to surround yourself with like-minded individuals, which is a shame because that social engagement is fun and it is enjoyable in a sense that it helps you feel like, you know, because there's other people doing similar things to you and who share similar values, like it doesn't feel like you're as alone in that sense. And it feels like you're a little bit more, I don't know. It's always been a motivator for me in a small sense, where it's obviously not the reason I've made my content, but it's one of those things that helps to reinforce it. Whether a lot of people know about you or nobody knows about you, just being able to surround yourself with a couple of like-minded individuals can go a long way to establishing some extra source of motivation, I guess, some tertiary source.
I think as long as communities actually talk about the projects, then it's fine. It's when it goes outside that when you have like 500 political channels or channels about things that have nothing to do with the production you're making, then that's just become pointless. Like at that point, like there's no longer any interaction for the community itself. Like that, I think is the takeaway. As long as it's actual discussions on the production, then it's fine. Like you can do it solo, as many people do, or you can just have it be a constant exchange of information with other people who are working on their own projects. Like I think both ways are perfectly valid. It just needs to be about the actual game instead of about fucking visual novels.
Yeah, good luck finding a community that actually wants to make games, though. You'll find a lot of people who say that they're a part of a community of game makers. Not going to find too many people who actually do that, though. So I guess that's it.
Well, yeah. Maybe once you get to playing the Doom games, you'll see if any of the effort they've made has been more fitting for the game, has been more like done in the right place with the right heart. But until then, we're stuck in medicine land, unfortunately.
Oh,
Hey, man.
Dark
Medicine
fell
is
downstairs! Hey, Metzen is a good voice actor, or whatever you were going to say.
He's such a good voice actor. Wow. And he's such a good writer. He's so creative.
Shoot me.
Chris Edgeworth Metzen. The